story will be special.
I can't do it! The words thickened Kagan's tongue and almost crashed against the cage of his teeth, but he forced them past his lips. Master, I can't do it! Defeat gave him a chance to catch his breath. Who knew failure could be so exhausting? In that moment, he looked for sympathy in the older man's eyes. To his disgust, he saw it right there, as bare as the cloudless sky. When Kagan's master spoke, it was with the lilting flow of faraway lands. His was an accent rarely carried by these northern winds. "It is not a matter whether you can," he said, "only that you must." The older man clicked his fingers. With a purple flash, the bundle of deadwood flared to life, a campfire born in a single moment of willpower. Kagan turned from the fire and spat into the snow. They were words he had heard before, and they were as useless now as they always were. "You make it seem so easy." His master shrugged, as if even that half-hearted accusation needed a moment's thought before replying. "It is simple, perhaps. Not easy. The two aren't always the same thing, but there has to be another way," Kagan muttered, unconsciously touching his fingertips to the burned scars blighting his cheek. Even as he said it, he found himself believing it. It had to be true. It wouldn't always be like this. It couldn't always be like this. Why? His master looked at him with unconcealed curiosity in the light of his eyes. "Why must there be another way? Because you continue to fail at this one?" Kagan grunted. Answering questions with questions is coward's way of speaking. His master raised one dark eyebrow. "And there it is. The wisdom of a barbarian who cannot read yet, or count past the number of fingers on his hands." The tension faded as the two of them shared a grim smile. They warmed broth, sipping it from ivory cups as their campfire cast them in a flickering amber glow. Above them, above the tundra of hundreds of miles around, the sky rippled with light. Kagan watched the heaven's familiar performance, the gauzy radiance caressing the moon and the stars that cradled it. For all that he loathed this land, there was beauty here in abundance, if a man knew where to look. Sometimes that was as simple as looking up. "The spirits dance wildly tonight," he said. His master tilted his unnatural gaze skyward. "The aurora? That is not the work of spirits. Only the action of solar winds on the upper reaches of..." Kagan stared at him. His master trailed off and awkwardly cleared his throat. Never mind. Silence returned to haunt them. Kagan drew the knife from his belt, setting to work on a sliver of unburned wood. He carved with easy strokes. Hands that had set fires and ended lives now turned to a far more peaceful purpose. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the sorcerer was watching him. "I want you to breathe in," the older man said. The blade still scraped over the bark. "I'm breathing now. I'm always breathing." "Please," his master said with an edge of impatience. "Do not be so obtuse." "So what?" "Obtuse, it means... well, never mind what it means. I want you to breathe in, and hold it as long as you can." "Why?" His master exhaled something like a sigh. "Fine," Kagan agreed, tossing the branch into the fire and sheathing his bone-handled knife once more. "Fine, fine, fine." He took a deep breath, swelling the muscles of his chest and shoulders. Silenced as he held his breath, he looked to his master for whatever would come next. "You do not create the air you breathe," the sorcerer said. "You draw it inside you, letting it sustain you. You use it as your body requests, and then release it as you exhale. It is never yours. You are just a vessel for it. You breathe in, you breathe out. You are a channel through which air flows." Kagan made to release his breath, though his master shook his head. "No, not yet. Feel the air in your lungs, Kagan. Feel it pushing at the cage of your body. Feel it straining to escape." The young barbarian's features were flushing red. His eyes asked the question his mouth could not. "No," the sorcerer answered. He gestured to Kagan with discolored hand. "Keep holding." When Kagan's endurance finally gave out, defiance took over, buying him more time. When even his defiance began to ebb with the pain of his quivering chest, naked stubbornness took control. He glared daggers at his master, trembling with the effort, knowing this was surely a test, knowing he had to prove something, without knowing just what that might be. Grayness misted the edges of his vision. His pulse was rhythmic thunder in his ears. All the while his master looked on, saying nothing. Finally, his breath burst back into the chill evening air, and Kagan sagged, gasping as he recovered. He was a wolf in that moment, a wild animal baring his teeth at the world around him, offering a threat to any that might attack in his moment of weakness. His master watched this too. "I was beginning to wonder if you would actually let yourself pass out," he murmured. Kagan grinned and pounded a fist against his chest, wordlessly proud of how long he had held out. "Therein lies the problem," his master observed, reading his posture. "I told you the air was not yours, yet you are thrilled with yourself for how long you kept it inside you. It is the same with magic. You want it, believing it can be owned. You cling to it, forgetting that you are merely a channel through which it passes. You choke it in your heart and in your hands, and so the magic is strangled in your grip, because you see it as something to bind to your will. It is not, and never will be. It is like air. You must draw in what exists around you, use it for a moment, then let it free." The two of them, student and master, barbarian and sorcerer, fell silent again. The wind howled through the canyons to the south, bringing a keening cry on the breeze. Kagan eyed the older man suspiciously. "So, why didn't you just say all that? Why make me hold my breath?" "I have said all of that before, several dozen times, in several dozen ways. I hoped a practical element to the lesson might aid your comprehension." Kagan snorted, then glared into the fire. "Master, something's been preying on my mind of late." The sorcerer chuckled to himself and patted the rolled bound parchment leash to his back. "No, Kagan, I am not letting you read this." The young tribesman grinned, though his stare was devoid of mirth. "That's not what I wanted to ask," he said. "What if I'm not a bad student? What if you're just a bad teacher?" His master stared into the flames, his wary eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. "Sometimes I wonder that myself," he replied. The next day they journeyed north and west. It would not be long before even the sparse tundra froze over, leaving them traveling through fields of lifeless ice. For now, their boots crunched on useless rocky soil, broken only by scrub flora. The sorcerer's thoughts were as bleak as their surroundings. But Kagan was his usual self, persevering without complaint, but equally without joy. "You said something the other day," the barbarian said as he drew alongside his master. "Something that sounded like a lie." The sorcerer turned slightly, his features shadowed by his hood. "I am many things," said the older man, "and not all of them are virtuous, but I am not a liar." Kagan grunted what may or may not have been an apology. Perhaps not a lie then, more like a fable. The sorcerer was watching him as they walked. "Go on." "That place, that empire, the kingdom you said was destroyed lifetimes ago." "Shurima, what of it?" "You said it lay in a land never touched by frost, or rimed by ice." Kagan grinned as if sharing a joke. "I am not as gullible as you believe I am, master." The sorcerer found himself dragged out of his bleakness by the barbarian's curiosity. He switched the burden of his backpack to his other shoulder, unable to hide a small smile. That was no lie. He stopped walking, turning to point southward. Far, far to the south, many hundreds of days' walk, and across another ocean, there lies a land where... How does one explain the desert to a man that only knows winter? He thought. How does one explain sand to a man that knows nothing but ice? A land where the earth is hot dust, and where snow is utterly unknown. The sun beats down without mercy. Even rain is rare. The ground thirsts for it, day after day. Kagan stared at him again. He had that look in his pale eyes. The one that said he didn't dare trust what he was being told, in case it was some trick to make him foolish. The sorcerer had seen that look in the eyes of many in his time, lonely children and fragile adults alike. A place that never felt Anivia's touch, Kagan murmured. But is the world really that large? That a man can walk so long and still not see its end? It is the truth. There are whole lands elsewhere in the world that are not frozen. In time you will learn that there are few places as cold as the Freljord. The conversation was tilted for the rest of the day's journey, and when they made camp, there seemed little more to say. Even so, the young barbarian persevered. He looked across the campfire, to where his master sat cross-legged in sudden introspection. Shouldn't you be teaching me something? The sorcerer raised an eyebrow. Should I? He always had a look about him that suggested his apprentice was interrupting him just by being alive. They'd been together for a few weeks now. Kagan was growing used to it. The youth dragged his hands through dirty hair, brushing his mother's ivory trinkets from his face. He muttered something that would, with imagination, pass for an agreement. When the sorcerer still refused to answer, he pressed harder. So, will we get to wherever it is we're going today? His master regarded him carefully. No, we will not reach our destination for several weeks. The sorcerer did not seem to be jesting, and I have given more thought to the difficulties you suffer in controlling your gifts, he added flatly. Kagan wasn't sure what to say. Sometimes silence was the only way to avoid looking ignorant or impatient, so he tried that. It seemed to work, for the sorcerer continued. You have some talent, true enough. The ability is in your blood. Now you must stop perceiving magic as an adversarial external force. It need not to be harnessed, merely nudged. I have watched you when you reach out to wield it. You seek to fashion it to your will. You want control. Kagan was getting frustrated now. But that's how magic works. That's what my mother always did. She wanted it to do something, so she made it happen. The sorcerer suppressed a wince of irritation. You don't need to make magic happen. Magic exists in the world. The raw stuff of creation is all around us. You do not need to clutch it and bend it to your needs. You can just encourage it. Direct it along the path you would prefer it to take. As he spoke, he moved his hands as if shaping a ball of clay. A faint chime sounded in the empty air, holding to its eternal perfect note. Misty energy snaked between his fingers, binding to one another in slow lashes. Several of them tendrilled out from the sphere to curl around his discolored hands, seething and darkly organic. There will always be those that study magic with rigid intent, mapping the ways one can exert their will on the primal forces. And, clumsy as it is, it will work. Slowly and with limited results. But you don't need to behave so crudely, Kagan. I am not shaping these energies into a sphere. I am merely encouraging them to form one. Do you understand? I see, Kagan admitted. But that's not the same as understanding. The sorcerer nodded, sharing a small smile. Evidently his apprentice has finally uttered something worthwhile. Some men and women, souls of iron discipline or limited imagination, will codify the magical energy that flows between realms. They will manipulate it and bind it however they are able. They are looking at sunlight through a crack in the wall, marveling at how it bleeds into their dark chambers. Instead, you could just go outside and marvel in the blinding light of day. He sighed pointedly. Your mother was one such mage, Kagan. Through repetitive ritual and traditional conditions, she dabbled in minor magics. But all she was doing, all any of them can do with their rituals and talismans and spellbooks, is create a barrier between themselves and the purer forces at play. Kagan watched the sphere ripple and revolve, not bound within the sorcerer's touch at all, constantly overlapping it or threatening to roll free. Here is the secret, young barbarian. Their eyes met in that moment, pale and human, reflected against shimmering and whatever his master really was. I'm listening, Kagan said, softer than he intended. He'd not just wanted to appear ignorant and odd, especially since he knew he was both. Magic wants not to be used, said the sorcerer. It is all around us, emanating from the first fragments of creation. It wants to be wielded, and that is the true challenge on the path we both walk. When you realize what the magic wants, how eager it is, Well, then the difficulty isn't how to begin wielding it, it's knowing when to stop. The sorcerer opened his hands, gently nudging the sphere of cascading forces towards his apprentice. The barbarian curiously reached out to welcome it, only for it to burst the moment his fingers grazed its surface. The trails of mist thinned and faded away. The ringing chime grew fainter, then altogether silent. "You will learn," the sorcerer promised. "Patience and humility are the hardest lessons, but they are all you will ever need." Kagan nodded, though not at once, and not without a sliver of doubt. The sorcerer didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, wrapped in a crude blanket of furs, staring up at the aurora undulating across the night sky. On the other side of the banked fire, the barbarian snored, doubtlessly dreaming the dreams of the unburdened, thought the sorcerer. No, that was unfair. Kagan was a brute, yes, but he was a youth roughly hewn from a land of endless hardship. The Freljord bred souls whose instinct was forever focused on survival above all else. Beasts with iron hides and spear-length fangs stalked the wilds. Raiders from rival villages shed blood all along the icy coasts. Their winter had lasted 100 lifetimes. Those people grew in a land where writing and artistry were luxuries, where the reading of books was an unimaginable myth, and lore was told and retold down the generations in whispered stories by wary elders and tribal shamans. And Kagan, for all his blunt stubbornness, was far from unburdened. Is it a mistake bringing him with me? Was this a moment of mercy, or a moment of weakness? There seemed no answer to that. I could have left him. As soon as the thought occurred, the rest of it rose unbidden, treacherously swift. And he would not be the first I had abandoned. The sorcerer looked through the haze of heat that shimmered above the faded fire, and watched the barbarian sleep. The young man's lip twitched, with the answering flicker of his fingers. I should wonder what you dream of, Kagan Road, the sorcerer whispered. What ghosts of fading memory reach out to reclaim you? Night after night in his dreams, Kagan walked the path of his past. Before meeting the sorcerer, he had lived an exile, wandering the frozen wastes alone, warmed only by his brash refusal to die. And before that, a failed shaman, a son to a distant mother. He was still young by any standard beyond that of Freljord, with scarcely the chill of 19 winters in his bones. He had lived hard, by his wits and the edge of his blade, winning a cut of renown and more than his fair share of indignity. Night after night in his dreams, he was a ragged wanderer lost in the howling white storm once more, slowly freezing to death in the snow. He was a healer, scrabbling over loose rocks in the rain, seeking the flashes of color that betrayed rare herbs amid the undergrowth. He was a boy crouched in his mother's cave, in that place that was a sanctuary from the world but never from her gaze, laden with misgivings. And night after night, in his dreams, Raigan's reach burned again. He was 7 years old when he learned the truth of his blood. His mother crouched before him, turning his face in her hands and looking at the scrapes and bruises marking his skin. He felt an uneasy flicker of surprise, for she rarely touched him. "Who did this to you?" she asked, and he was drawing breath to answer her. She spoke over him with words he was far more used to hearing. "What did you do? What did you do wrong to earn this punishment?" She moved away before he could reply. He trembled in the wake of her touch on his skin, unused to the contact, fearing and cherishing that moment of awkward closeness. "Just wrestling, mother. In the village all the boys wrestle, and the girls too." She regarded him with a skeptical eye. "You didn't get those marks from wrestling, Kagan," she muttered. "I'm not a fool. There was a fight after the wrestling." He wiped his nose on his ragged sleeve, smearing away a half-dried scab. "Some of the other boys didn't like me winning. They got angry." His mother was a thin woman, frail in a land that devoured the weak. She was old before her time, a victim of unspoken sorrows and the isolation brought about by her talents. Even at 7, Kagan knew all of this. He was a perceptive child. This was the advantage of having a mage for a mother. As he looked up at her, framed as she was by the mouth of the cave they called home, He saw a softness in her eyes that was as unfamiliar as the touch on his face that had been a moment before. He thought she might sink back to her knees before him and draw him into an embrace, and the thought terrified him as much as he yearned for it. Instead, her dark eyes frosted over. What if I told you about upsetting the other children? You'll just make our lives even harder if the village hates you, Kagan. But they started it. She stopped, half turned, and looked back down at him. Her expression was as dark and cold as her eyes. The younger gaze lifted to meet hers was pale green, like she so often told him his father's had been. And you started it all the other times. Your temper, Kagan. No, I didn't, the boy lied. Not every time, at least. His mother moved further back into the cave, clutching by the fire pit, stirring the watery broth of boiled elnuk fat that would serve as their dinner for the next 3 nights. There is magic in our blood, in our bones, in our breath. We have to be careful in ways other people don't. But you shouldn't cause trouble in the village. We already live here on their sufferance. Old Rygen had been good to us, letting us stay here. Instinct moved Kagan's mouth before he had time to think. We live in a cave in the rocks, far from the village, he said. You should stop healing them if they are so bad to us. We should leave. You don't know what you're talking about, Kagan. I heal because I have the power to do it. And we stay because we have to stay. She nodded to the hillside where the trees were blacked by the night and silvered by the moon. We would die out there, where the woods become ice and snow, all the way to the world's end. Let them say whatever they want to say. Don't stir up trouble. Don't stir up the magic in your blood. But the boy stood still in the rim of the cave. If they say bad things about me, or they fight me, I will fight back. I'm not a coward like you. This night would become a memory branded forever into his mind because of what came next. For the first time, he didn't bow his head and promise to obey her. Instead, he clenched his little fists and narrowed his eyes. In the silence that stretched between mother and son, he expected a slap, one of her forceless cracks against his cheek that would somehow sting for an hour afterwards, or maybe yet more weeping. His mother cried a lot, quiet and alone long into the night when she thought he was asleep. But this time, there was something new in her eyes, something fearful. You are your father's son. The words were calm and measured, and somehow all the worse for it. His eyes always looking at me, his crime always there to remind me, and now his words, his spite, thrown in my face. The boy gazed up at her in odd childish fury. Is that why you hate me? She hesitated before answering, and that meant more than any answer ever could. It was that hesitation he never forgot, even years later, long after her skinny bones were naught but ash and dust on a cooling funeral pyre. He was 13 when he first saw Svanna. She came to Rygen's reach with 24 others, the survivors of a nomadic clan that had dwindled in the winds over the course of a generation. Rather than take to raiding like so many others, they settled in the reach, bringing fresh blood, skills, and spears to the people of the prosperous fishing village. Kagan met her one day in the half-light of the setting sun. He was picking heather and herbs in the southern hills, stripping the stems of thorns before stuffing them into his stag-hide satchel. It was a slow task when done right, and Kagan's fingers were pin-pricked in 100 places from his haste. At one point he looked up, and there she was. He stopped working. He rose to his feet, brushing dirt from his sore hands, with no idea how curiosity and surprise looked like suspicion on his otherwise fine features. You would be handsome, his mother had once said, if you could stop glaring at the world as if you wanted to avenge yourself upon it. Who are you? He asked. She flinched at the question, and even to his own ears he sounded abrupt. I mean, you're one of the newcomers. I know that. What's your name? What are you doing out here? Are you lost? The questions rained on the girl like flung stones. She was older than him, though by no more than a year or two, willowly wide-eyed, practically drowning in her heavy furs. She stared back at him as she spoke. She had the voice of a mouse. Are you the healer's boy? He smiled, showing all teeth and no humor. For the first time in years, he felt the ache of knowing that they talked ill of him in the village. Here was someone new to his world, and it was someone who had already heard 100 dark things about him. Kagan, he replied. He swallowed and sought to soften his words. Yes, I am the healer's boy, he added with a nod. Who are you? Zvana, can you come? My father is sick. Kagan's heart sank. He found himself pitching his voice lower, as if she was a grazing beast he didn't want to frighten away. I'm not a healer, not like my mother. The confession was like having a tooth pulled out. I just help her. She's on her way to the village, the girl said. She told me to find you. You have the herbs she needs. Kagan cursed as he buckled his back into place. He started towards her, moving lightly over the dark earth and scree. I'll come now. Who's your father? What's wrong with him? He's a sailmaker, Zvana replied, leading the way back to the reach. He can't eat or drink. His stomach hurts. My mother will know what to do. Kagan spoke in the tones of absolute confidence as he followed her across the hillside, descending towards the village. Inwardly, he felt a stab every time she glanced back at him, and he wondered just what she had heard from the other children in the village. He didn't have to wonder for long. She spoke gently without judgment. Old Dragon said you're a raider's son, a reaver bastard. Gloom was taking hold around them with the setting of the sun. Kagan showed no emotion at all. Old Dragon said the truth. Does it really make you bad luck? Like the legends say. Depends which legends you believe. Kagan considered that a cunning enough answer, but she twisted it back at him a moment later. Which legends do you believe? She asked, looking over her shoulder. He met her gaze in the twilight, and felt the force of her gentle gaze like an axe to the gut. None of them, he thought. They are all fears held by foolish men and women afraid of true magic. I don't know, he said. She had no response for that. She did, however, have another question. If your mother is a healer, why aren't you? Because the magic doesn't work for me, he almost said aloud, but thought better of it. Because I want to be a warrior. Zvana kept ahead of him, her threat light across the icy rocks. But there are no warriors here, only hunters. Well, I want to be a warrior. People need healers more than warriors, she pointed out. Oh, Kagan spat into the undergrowth. Then why do shamans have no friends? He knew the answer to that. He had heard it enough. People are frightened of me, his mother always said. But Zvana had a different answer. If you help my father, I'll be your friend. He was 16 when he broke Erak's jaw. 16 and already possessing a man's size and muscle. 16 and all too familiar when it came to proving a point with his fists. His mother warned about it, time and again, and now Zvana did the same. Your temper, Kagan, she would say in the same tone as his mother. In his 16th year, the solstice celebration was a riotous affair, a louder and brighter celebration than usual, with the arrival of a merchant caravan and 3 string musicians from Valor's Hollow, far to the southwest. Oathings were made by the shore, and promises of eternal love spoken ardently, foolishly and frequently. Young warriors fire danced to impress the unwed locals watching from the sides. Hearts were broken and mended, grudges forged and settled. Fights broke out over betrothals, over property, over matters of honor. The abundance of drink only added to the atmosphere of revelry. Many were the regrets that came with the pale winter's dawn, when the clarity of the unmelting snows turned through fading hangovers. But the fight between Kagan and Erak was like no other. Bathed in the sweat from the fire dance, Kagan looked for Zvana by the shoreline. Had she seen him perform? Had she watched him leave the other young men of the village panting, unable to keep up with his wild leaps? His mother was a sick, thin wraith in her sealskin cloak. Her hair was ragged, with the trinkets and talismans of bone tied into unwashed strands resting against her cheeks. She gripped his wrist. The solstice was one of the few nights their presence was tolerated in the village, and his mother had made the journey with him. "Where's Zvana?" he asked her. "Kagan," she warned him as she held his wrist. "I want you to be calm." The heat of the flames and the sweat on his skin no longer existed. His blood was frost, his bones were ice. "Where's Zvana?" he asked again, this time in a growl. His mother started to explain, but he didn't need her to. Somehow he knew. Perhaps it was nothing more than a flash of intuition through his dawning temper. Or perhaps it was, as the sorcerer would later say, a flicker of insight from his latent magical gifts. Whatever the truth, he shoved his mother aside. He went down to the waves where young couples stood with their families, garlanded by winter flowers, swearing oaths to stay loyal and loving for the rest of their lives. Murmurs started up as he drew near. He ignored them. They became objections as he forced his way through the crowd. He ignored those too. He wasn't too late. That was what mattered. There was still time. Zvana! All eyes turned to him, though hers was the only gaze that mattered. He saw the joy die in her eyes as she recognized the look upon his face. The crown of white winter blossoms was at odds with her black hair. He wanted to rip it from her head. The young man at her side moved protectively in front of her, but she eased him aside to confront Kagan herself. Don't do this, Kagan. My father arranged it. I could have refused if I wanted to. Please don't do this, not now. But you're mine. He reached for her hand. She wasn't fast enough to draw away. That or she knew it would spark him further if she tried. I'm not yours, she said softly. They stood in the center of the crowd, as if they were the ones about to bound together in the sight of the gods. I'm not anyone's, but I'm accepting Malvar's pledge. Kagan could have dealt with it, if that was all it had been. The embarrassment meant nothing to him. For what was a fleeting adolescent humiliation to one that had endured nothing but shame for most of his life? He could have walked away right then, or even, against every desire and prayer, stayed in the crowd and lied his way through the laughter and cheers and the blessings. He would have done that for her. Not easily, no, but willingly. Anything for Zvana. He was already releasing her, readying a full smile and drawing breath to apologize, when a hand slammed down on his shoulder. Leave her alone, boy. Old Reigen's voice, cracked with edge, cut through the silence. This was a man, the founder of the settlement, who looked like he'd been old when the world was still young. He was at least 70, likely close to 80, and though it wasn't his hand holding Kagan back, he directed the man that surrounded the healer's son now. You get out of here, Reaver bastard, before you bring yet another misfortune down on us all. The hands tried to haul him back, but Kagan stood firm. He was not a boy. He had a man's strength now. Don't touch me, he said through clenched teeth. Whatever was on his face caused Zvana to back away. Other hands joined the first, dragging him away from her, making him stumble. And, as always, instinct was there to catch him. He turned, he roared, and he swung at the closest of the men hauling him away. Zvana's father went down in a boneless heap, his jaw shattered. Kagan walked away. Others in the crowd cried out or hurled insults, but none sought to bar his passage or come after him. There was satisfaction in that, vindication even. He coughed at the corners of his eyes on the way home, refusing to cry, and unpleasantly soothed by the sweet pain in his throbbing knuckles. He was 19 when he burned his mother on her funeral pyre, and spread her ashes along the hillside overlooking Reigen's Reach the following morning. He knew he would have to bear the burden alone, despite all his mother had done for the village. For all that they had feared her, they had needed her and valued her. And yet, here he was, casting her remains through bitter winds with the prayer to the Seal Sister, alone but for his thoughts. He imagined them in the village, and if they acknowledged his mother's death at all, it was with a selfish eye to their own suffering. They'd be worried now, with the healer gone. They couldn't rely on her son to step up after all. The hereditary chain had been broken when his raiding father had stirred him, pouring misfortune into a mage's blood. Right now, those people would all be bleating their useless sentiments about his mother, maybe even convincing themselves that a few kind words uttered far too late severed them from the guilt and responsibility of how they had treated her in her life. Far more likely, they were quietly celebrating the passing of a shadow from their lives. Superstitious animals, all of them. Only 3 of them came out from the village at all, and they hadn't made a journey to say their farewells. Zvana approached him after the lonely ceremony was over, but her son, with the same black hair as his mother, refused to come near Kagan. The boy, now almost 3, stayed at his father's side a short distance away. The little one is scared of me, Kagan observed without rancor. Zvana hesitated, just as Kagan's mother had once hesitated, setting the truth in his mind. He's heard stories, she admitted. I'm sure he has. He tried to keep his tone natural. What do you want? She kissed his cheek. I'm sorry for your loss, Kagan. She was a kind soul. Kind wasn't the word he connected with his mother, but now was hardly the time to argue. Yes, he said, she was. But what did you really come to say? We were friends once. I can tell that you're holding something back. She didn't smile as she replied. Old Raigan, he's going to ask you to leave. Kagan scratched his chin. He was too wary that day to feel anything, least of all surprise. He didn't need to ask why Raigan had come to that decision. There was still one shadow darkening the edge of the settlement. The last shadow that would finally fade away. So the bad-omened boy can't lurk nearby now his mother's dead. He spat onto the ashy earth. At least she was useful, right? She was the one with magic. I'm sorry, Kagan. For a brief time, together on the hillside, things were just as they had been few short years ago. She leached the angry heat from his heart just by being near, and he breathed in the cold air, defying every urge to reach out for her. You should go, he muttered, and nodded towards Malvir and the young boy. Your family is waiting. Where will you go? She asked. She drew her fur stider around herself. What will you do? His mother's words echoed down the years. We would die out there, where the woods become ice and snow, all the way to the world's end. I'll find my father, he replied. She looked at him, troubled. He could see the doubt in her eyes and worse, the fear. The fear that might be serious. You didn't mean that, Kagan. You don't know who your father's people are, or where they hailed from, or anything. How would you ever hope to find him? I'll try at least. Kagan resisted the urge to spit again. Even an impossible ambition sounded better than, I don't know what I'll do, Svana. I'll probably die alone in the ice. She was drawing a breath to fight him on it, even after all those years of little more than silence. But he hushed her with a single shake of his head. I'll come to see you before I leave. We'll talk then. I'll be down in the village tomorrow for supplies. I'll need things for my journey. Svana hesitated again, and he knew. Kagan knew as if the ancestor spirits had whispered it to him on the wind. Old Raigan has forbidden it. He sighed. The words weren't a question, not even a guess. I'm not allowed down into the reach, not even to trade before I go. She passed a small satchel against his chest, and that confirmed it. He could guess what would be in there. Dried foodstuffs, and whatever meager provisions her young family could spare. The ferocity of unfamiliar gesture left him shaking and almost accepting the gift. But he handed it back to her. I'll be fine, he promised her. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. That night, he went into Raigan's reach alone. He carried a week's worth of supplies in his pack, an ivory spear in his hand, and his hair was woven with his mother's bone charms. He looked as much a medic and shaman as he ever had, though he carried himself with a warrior's bulk, and moved with a hunter's grace. Dawn was still 3 hours distant. Here, in the stillest part of the night, Kagan stalked with exaggerated care, moving between the earthwork huts of the families that had rejected him and his mother for all of his short, harsh life. He felt no malice toward them. Not anymore. The old anger was reduced to embers. Alive, but banked, burning low. If he felt anything more, it was a deep-grained and exhausted sense of pity. They were simple. They were slaves to their misjudgments. No, this true hatred was reserved for one soul above all others. Old Raigan's longhouse sat proudly in the settlement's heart. Kagan drew near, avoiding the indifferent gaze of the watchmen by staying in the shadows cast by the descending moon. Theirs was a dreary duty, and they treated it with all the informality one would expect. Why should they expect any trammel from the naked tundra, or the bare ocean? No raiders had landed in Raigan's reach for a long time after all. Kagan ghosted inside. Old Raigan awoke to find a shadow crouched at the foot of his bed. In the shadow's pale eyes were slivers of reflected moonlight, and in the shadow's hands was an ivory knife. A ritual dagger last carried by Kresia Road, the witch that had died only days before. It was a blade that had been used, so it was set for blood sacrifices. The shadow smiled and spoke in a low, feral whisper. If you make a single sound without my permission, old man, you die. In the light-starved gloom, Reigen could have passed for 100 years old. His sinews stung from the reek of lantern oil and the animal spice of the intruder's sweat. He nodded in helpless obedience. The shadow leaned forward and the reaver bastard Kagan's face leered, coldly amused from the darkness. I'm going to tell you something, old man, and you will listen to me, if for no other reason than it lets you alive a little longer. The dagger, carved from a Druvask tooth, glinted in the half-dark. Kagan rested the tip, carved to a punching point, on the man's shaggy throat. Nod if you understand. Reigen nodded, wisely mute. Good. Kagan kept his knife in place. His eyes were liquid with hatred, his teeth almost trembling with the force of his anger. He was a creature on the edge of savagery, held back only by the tethered shreds of humanity. Reigen swallowed hard, saying nothing. He was shaking himself for different reasons. You killed my mother, Kagan growled. It wasn't the disease that ate her away from within. It was you. You killed her. Day by day. With your mistrust and your ingratitude. You killed her by exiling her to the cold comfort of that cave. You killed her by banishing her on the whims of your stupid superstition. The blade rested on the old man's cheek, ready to saw through the flesh. And now you're killing me, Kagan added softly. It wasn't enough to shame me for the sin of my father's blood, and curse me for being bad luck. It wasn't enough to kick a child out of your precious village, over and over, and teaching me nothing except how to hate others. Now, while the embers of my mother's funeral pyre are still warm, you want to damn me to wander the wasteland, to die. And then, the dagger was gone. The intruder slipped from the bed, edging back across the room. Kagan's smile became a grin, scarcely illuminated by the shattered lantern he held up from the bedchamber's table. That's all I came here to say. I want you to think about those words when I'm gone. I want you to think of the boy you helped to raise by throwing him and his mother out to the cold. Reigen didn't know how to respond, or if the healer's son even desired to reply. He stayed silent out of a healthy blend of wisdom and fear, breathing the earthly oily scent that filled the room. Kagan unshuttered the lantern, and a sudden amber glow spread across the room. Patches of resinous wetness marked the floorboards, the walls, the shelves, even the bed sheets. The intruder had done his work well, in silence, before waking his prey. Wait! The old man stammered, breathless with dawning panic. Wait! No, I have a journey to make, Kagan said, almost conversationally. And I should warm my hands before I go. Goodbye, Reigen. Wait, please! But Kagan didn't wait. He was backing away towards the door, and tossed the lantern like a parting gift. It smashed on the rough floorboards of the bedchamber. The world ignited, and Kagan laughed even as the flames licked his own flesh. Fire is like a living thing, rapacious and ravenous. It has its own hunger, its own whims, and, like fate, its own vile sense of humor. It leapt in caressing licks, as sparks that were carried by the Freljord's hateful wind, dancing across nearby rooftops. Everywhere that it touched, it bit down and devoured. Kagan cut north, heading through the forested lowlands, blind to the devastation in his wake. He had more pressing matters than waiting to see if old Reigen's hole would burn all the way to the ground. He had the seared ruin of his face to deal with, a screaming, searing wash of pain bathing the left side of his features, soothed only by pressing his flesh into the snowy earth. Not for the first time, he wondered if there might not be something to all the talk of the ill fortune in his blood. By the time he reached high enough ground to turn back and witness the results of his handiwork, the sun was rising above the ocean, and the fire had long since been reduced down to a pall of thick smoke, curling and thinning in the mercy of the morning winds. He held a palmful of ice against his burnt cheek, hoping to see Reigen's hole as a charred black heart in the center of the village. What he saw instead stopped his breath. Mute with horror, scarred by carelessness, and staggering in an awkward run, the betrayer made his way back to the scene of his betrayal. At first, no one marked his return. The survivors wandered among the charred skeletons of their homes, where all they owned was now gone. He was just one silhouette in the smoky haze, one more scarred face among those that still lived. He found Svana outside the blackened remains of her hut. She'd been laid carefully on the earth with her son and husband, the three of them silent and still beneath the same sooty blanket. Kagan crouched beside them for an unknown time, his skull empty of thought, his body empty of strength. Perhaps he wept. He wasn't sure. Not then and not after, though he felt the sting of salt upon his wounded cheek. He could only remember two things for certain in his time at her side. The first was the sight of the family's faces when he pulled the sheet back. To be certain it was them. When he had his answer, he covered them again. The second was resting his ungloved hands on the filthy shroud, pleading to his mother's old magic to work through him. He achieved no more in that moment than he ever had, when seeking to draw upon his supposed gifts. They stayed dead, he stayed broken. Sometime later, of course, the others came for him. Kagan stayed on his knees by Svana's side as they threw insults and blame, as they bleated about hexes and sacred misfortune, and cursed the day he had been born. Kagan let it all wash over him. It was nothing against the emptiness in his chest and the acid ache of his face. The survivors had no idea. They blamed him out of a mournful superstition because there was no one else to blame, little knowing the true harm he had done to them all. They blamed his blood when they should have blamed his deeds. Kagan left the razed village without looking back. He walked out into the wilderness, just as he had planned, though the anticipated sense of exaltation was now nothing but ashes in his mouth. What followed were weeks of wandering. Kagan made his way inland, following game spoor and trade trails, with no destination in mind and no knowledge of what settlements lay where. The only places he knew well were isolated glades and mountain sides, with harvestable herbs his mother had used in her medical concoctions. Even the closest settlement, Valor's Hollow, was weeks away, and likely to be the new home of any survivors from Raigan's Reach. If Kagan found his way there, he doubted the welcome would be warm. Far likelier it would be fatal. He hunted when he could, though he lacked the true hunter skills. Once he gored on the half-cooked carcass of a rabbit, only to throw the mess back up hours later when his belly rebelled. The days bled into weeks, and the weeks into a month, and more, as the sky stayed dark and the weather turned foul. He saw no sign of nearby settlements. He spent hours in snow-blind days, and others in a frost-mad trace. Day after day he encountered nothing but the icy indifference of his homeland. The Freljord cared nothing for whether he lived or died by its howling breath. Nowhere else in the world could teach such a brutal lesson in a man's insignificance. Fortune, or perhaps a cruel twist of fate, led him to a cave formed from the same pale rock as his mother's sanctuary. Emaciated, weakened from exposure, scarred by his own fire, Kagan Road lay down on the cold rock, feeling his skin freeze to the stone. He would lie here and wait for the latest blizzard to die down, or he would lie here and wait to die, whichever came first. But on that night, he met the man who would become his teacher, his master. The figure melted out of the storm in a weary trudge, with his shoulders hunched and head down. His beard was shaggy and grey, not with age but the bite of the frosty winds. His features were grand beneath his hood, and his eyes shimmered with unnatural iridescence. Strangest of all was the man's skin, mottled and tattooed. In the storm's light with each crash of lightning, the flesh looked as though it were darkening to blue. Later by firelight it was far more clearly paling to violet. As meetings fated by destiny went, it was too anticlimactic for any bard's tale or saga of old. No arcane declarations were made, no binding pacts were sworn. The newcomer had merely stood at the mouth of the cave, turning a suspicious eye on the human wreckage lying before him. "What," the sorcerer muttered, "do we have here?" Kagan drifted in and out of consciousness, as well as his senses. When he finally managed to summon words, he accused the older man of being a spirit or an illusion. In answer, the sorcerer crouched beside him, offering a hand. Warmth spread through Kagan from his touch, in a rush of tingling life. It was not the sting of flame, yet the relief it brought was so fierce that it almost broke him. "I'm neither a phantom nor a fiction," the newcomer had said. "My name is Rise. And you, dear miserable creature, who are you?" Kagan woke well after dawn, tumbling the grit from his eyes. It didn't surprise him to see his master was already up, sitting cross-legged and with his eyes closed. He was meditating, the barbarian knew, though he couldn't understand the point of sitting still for an hour a day. What was it supposed to accomplish? It seemed a strange suspension between sleeping and being awake, to no obvious purpose. "Good morning," the sorcerer said without opening his eyes. "You did not sleep well," he added. As so often, it was a statement and not a question. Kagan emptied one nostril into the ashes of the campfire and grunted. "Why do I feel like you're watching me, even when your eyes are closed?" "Because you're uneasy around others. It makes you doubt their intentions." Kagan grunted again. "There is nothing wrong with a little healthy suspicion." Rise chuckled, remaining motionless in his meditative pose. Kagan bristled at that. "What's so funny? I hear myself in your words sometimes. The way you turn mistrust into a virtue is especially familiar to me. I can't say I blame you, given all you have endured." Kagan stared at him. Can he read my mind? Does he see my dreams? The sorcerer made no response, not even a twitch. The young barbarian rose, stretching out the night's soreness with a delicious crackle of sinew. "Do you want me to heat the last of the broth, to break our fast?" "Decent of you, Kagan. Will you gather firewood or use your gifts?" The question was loaded, bordering on condescending, and it took no small effort for Kagan to avoid the bait. "Firewood. I'll try the magic again later." Another chuckle, another maddening chuckle. "As you wish," Rise replied. Kagan took his time finding enough fallen deadwood. His skull was awhirl with echoes of their conversation these last few weeks. Something was naggy at the back of his brain, something that made the healing burn scars itch across his face. It was only when he returned to their makeshift camp and dumped the armful of broken branches that he realized what it was. "Master." The sorcerer didn't move, but the air seemed to change around them both. It became sharper somehow, maybe a touch cooler, charged with some unseen force. "Yes?" Kagan cleared his throat, fighting for the right way to say it. "When you spoke of magic yesterday, you mentioned the stuff of creation?" Rise mentioned motionless, but for his sorcery darkened lips. "I did, yes. Go on." Kagan took a breath, struggling with the immensity of what he wanted to say. "Well, water comes from rain, ice and the sea. Fire comes from sparks and tinder, or from lightning striking the forest. And those trees that make up the forest, they come from seeds. All true to some degree, and surprisingly poetic for this hour of the morning. What is the conclusion of this thesis?" "This what?" The older man smiled, not unkindly. "What are you trying to say, Kagan?" "Just that everything comes from somewhere. Everything has a birth, a source. Is it the same for magic? Does it have a source in the world?" Rise didn't answer at once. His stillness, to Kagan's eyes, seemed suddenly a thing of restraint rather than serenity. "That is an intelligent question, my friend. There is a purity to your barbaric way of thinking, and I commend you for that line of thought, but that is not a discussion you and I are ready to have." The barbarian clenched his teeth, swallowing his temper. Finally, he had asked something worthy of an answer and his master denied it to him. "But I was thinking, if you could control the rain, you could make new rivers. If you had 1,000 seeds, you could plant a new forest. If you had iron, you can forge an axe. But what if you control the source of magic? You wouldn't need to guide it or nudge it. You could command it after all." Rise opened his eyes. His gaze was colder than any Freljordian wind. There was mercy in those eyes and admiration, but beneath both there was a knifing, sickly hint of fear. "You're afraid," Kagan thought, and his skin crawled at the very idea. He didn't know why. He couldn't guess what it was about his words that would inspire that stern, cold dread in his master's soul. But Kagan knew what fear looked like in the eyes of others. He had seen it all his life. "Not yet," Rise murmured. "When you are ready, we will speak of this, but not yet." Kagan Rode nodded, agreeing without understanding, intrigued by the unease in his master's stare. Fear was a weakness after all, and weaknesses had to be faced and conquered. And that was the big story of Brand. It is not the complete origin story because we still don't know how the rune exactly turned Brand into, well, Brand, but at least we know there are some more windows that Riot can use further in the stories. But with that, if you guys enjoyed this video, you know exactly what to do. If you didn't like it, you know exactly what to do as well. You can also follow us on our social media, Twitch, merch and PO Box. The links will be in the description. Of course, massive, and I mean massive shout out to our patrons for going the extra mile. You guys are absolutely amazing. And with that, thank you guys so much for being here and for your support. You know, I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you come again. I will now go and conquer some Alliance pigs. Hello everyone and welcome! I was pleasantly surprised when I saw how many people couldn't wait for me to cover the new Varus. And I have to say I understand why, because we have never had so much story focused on a single character. So without further ado, let's have a look at Varus, the Arrow of Retribution. The mortal mages of Runeterra wielded wild magic, heedless of the consequences beyond their own world. Their reckless use of magic attracted the hunger of the Darkin, who sent their finest warriors to conquer this new world. Varus traveled to Runeterra with the second wave of invaders, and with his crystalline bow, he assassinated enemy commanders and champions, helping the Darkin defeat the mortal armies with ever greater ease. He was a deadly killer who loved to torment his foes with arrows, driving them to insanity before closing for the kill. Soon after Aatrox's fall, Varus was cornered by Vastayan Moonstalkers and human mages in service of a golden armored warrior queen. They bound him within his crystalline bow, leaving him to howl with impotent rage. By now, the corrupting influence of the Darkin was known, and the warrior queen alone wielded the deadly bow in the final battle of the war, loosing the last bolt that broke the bridge to the Darkin world forever. At the end of the Darkin War, the queen carried Varus's bow to the land that would become known as Ionia. Her last act was to imprison the bow deep within a lightless cell, sunk deep beneath a mountain temple overlooking the village of Pallas. There it remained, imprisoned by the natural magics of Ionia and the ritual ministrations of its guardians. The bow remained hidden deep underground for centuries, unknown, untouched, all but forgotten. Ionia, a land of magic, a land of balance, a land of light, but not always a land of peace. Just as there are creatures within Ionia who seek to upset its order, so too are there those who fight to preserve it. Arrows of protection, hunters of monsters. Valmar and Kai are two such hunters, but not all monsters can be defeated with bow and steel, and not all darkness can be so easily banished by the light. In the Nystrom forest of Ionia. Loose, damn you! Not yet. Hey, over here! Valmar! Move swift as the wind, and let flesh and steel strike as one. I serve the great balance, with heart and steel, in thought and deed. Very poetic, Kai. Now are you gonna help me before I bleed to death? The thing barely scratched you. Trust me, it doesn't feel that way. Risky move going for the high cut to the beast's throat. Do not talk to me about risky moves. What were you thinking leaping out of the tree like that? I was giving you an opening. You think I needed one? I don't know. I just reacted. That has always been your problem, Val. You react without thinking. Later that day. How much longer? Smells like it's ready. No, I mean, how much longer until we reach Palace? It's a day's ride to my mother's house, assuming your stitching holds. There's not a surgeon in Ionia that can match my skill with a needle. You can wrestle the Spirit Walker and those stitches would not split. Feels much better now. It's not even painful. The Serpent Leaf poultice dulls the pain, but not the mind. Serpent Leaf? Wait, isn't that poisonous? It can be if it is not picked correctly. And you know how to pick it correctly. Yes, it's a beautiful flower, but it's a predator that lures insects with its scent and colors. It paralyzes its prey, then slowly devours them. Beautiful and lethal, the perfect hunter. But there are creatures that mimic serpent leaf prey. Immune to the plant's sting, they eat it from the inside when the leaves close. The roles of predator and prey are reversed. Just so, even the greatest hunters are not invulnerable. They can be killed and should have a care what prey they hunt. I understand, but do you remember what the seer at Shojin told us? Yes. Tell me. He said our souls would be as one. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. My mother will love you. The Hirana Academy doesn't give its highest honor to stupid people. What if she does not like me? Do you love me? Yes. Then she'll like you. Welcome to Palace. I thought your mother was the one being honored. She is, but the villagers are very proud of me. Mother tells anyone who listen of my exploits. Your exploits? Our exploits. What do you think I put in all the letters I sent her? You tell her about the monsters? That he does, Slayer Kai. But I often wish he would leave out some of the gorier details. I don't really need to know how badly I got at Carnaton stinks. Welcome home, my son. I had a revered uncle who won the Jade Owl from the academy at Hirana, but I never thought to see an Ember Rose. Nor I. The final debate was hard fought against one of the Shojin finest masters of rhetoric. Don't let her modesty fool you, Kai. I've seen the scrolls. She crushed him, made him look like a half-witted novice. Modesty is a shining light, Val. It prepares the mind to receive knowledge and the heart truth. You know the Navarian epilogues? I am from Navarai. My father read them to me as a child. My son has chosen his heart light wisely. Is that really a Volkodalg horn? Did you really slay an Ironback? What about the Merc Wolf of Shonga? Was it really as big as they say? Do you think we should tell them? I'm not sure their fragile little hearts could stand it. Maybe just one. So, how did I do? Terrible, she hates you. Is that what she said to you before we came upstairs? No, she loves you. That was something else. She says that we have to take the beast's horn to the Aluzin cage as an offering. The temple on the cliff? Yes. Every traveler brings something that has shapen them. It's said to strengthen the temple's magic.
Unaccounted eons I have waited. So know this, son of Ionia. That sound you hear? It is the bliss of renewal.
I had forgotten how high this damn place is. We have climbed higher. Remember the Ares of the Siren? I'd rather not. What's wrong? You look pale. I slept badly. I only woke when you knocked over the helmet. Why do you even have that ugly thing? It's a trophy hunted from a pair of Noxian war scouts. What happened to the other scout? Slippery bastard sailed back to Noxus. We have come a long way, you and I. Further than any could guess. You will walk the rest of the way with me? Always. Mother Kimela told me the carvings here can move a soul to tears. There's a lot here can do that. Welcome back, Slayer Valmar. Master Kobayashi, allow me to introduce my Heartlight, Kai. The horn of a Volcarak that once terrorized the forest dwellers of Nistoram. You killed a Volcarak? We both did. To fight as an arrow of protection is noble. We serve the great balance. Present your offering before the waters that bring life to us all. I like him. I love him. I know. And that will make all this the more painful for you. Make more painful? You must leave him, Valmar. Walk away from all you feel. And do it now, or you will know pain like no other. What? Why? The magic of this place is ancient. It weaves the past and future and can renew that which is broken. Such power keeps what is chained within slumbering and offers glimpses of things that have not yet come to pass. What have you seen? It is what I have felt. Your soul's despair as it wanders lost and alone in darkness. The pain of unimaginable loss. The life of an arrow is fleeting, built of nothing but direction and intent. I know the damn oath. Then you already know the truest arrow flies alone. I serve the great balance, with heart and steel, in thought and deed. Noxus. Guy! Noxian dogs, you desecrate this holy place? Valmar! Valmar! I serve the great balance, with heart and steel, in thought and deed. Guy!
Ever is blood a call to my kind?
No, Guy!
Vengeance is the hunger, fed by slaughter.
Val,
Grief is the key.
you have to run. Go while you still can. No, I won't leave you. You must. More will come. I can't lose you.
Turned by laws, but to walk the darkest path.
You will not. I am your heartlight. No, don't go, please. I will always be with you. Don't leave me. I'm begging you.
One needs only the glimmer of hope.
Valmar, don't. You must not. It wants you. You said the magic here could renew that which is broken. He is my heartlight, and I have to try to save him.
That sound you hear is an arrow of retribution. not know this flesh. Who am I? Velma. Kai. Mortal names, they mean nothing. I wear newly woven flesh of meat and bone and skin to bear my form. But I am eternal. I am the Heart Seeker, the swift bolt from the darkness. I am Varus.
No. Wait. I don't... How? Guy, where are you? Guy! Gods, no. Not this, Val. Please.
This is my flesh now. Valmar offered it willingly in return for your life.
My life? No, I don't want it. Please, I beg you. Whatever you are, let me die.
Your time will come, Kai. But the flames of our vengeance will consume a multitude of souls before yours.
Put your damn backs into it. The wards are almost broken.
How soon you upstart apes forget. This bow is once my prison. But no prison can hold my kind forever. Too long since I supped the sweat stink of mortal terror. This flesh is new, but it is fast. Mages far greater than you sought my death a long time ago. They failed as well. This pain is my gift to you. Savor it.
Murder carries a price, Noxian dog. No, Val. It wants you to hate. Don't let it in.
How can you not hate them, Valmar? They killed your Heartlight. Look. Do you see? He was cut down like an animal.
Gods, no. I can't watch you die again. Guy, please. Then don't. Think of me as I was. A happy memory we shared. Eating dinner with your mother. I remember. You and I. Yes, at my mother's table. Family all around us. Yes, hold to that. Remember that laugh in that moment. There is no hate, no pain.
Family, yes. Seek solace at home and hearth with those you loved. See what horrors your kind is capable of inflicting. Then tell me I am any worse. This is how we are remembered? Demons? How gratuitously petty. We were so much more until you destroyed us. But you didn't destroy us all. And that mistake will be your undoing. So this is Palas. No wonder you left as soon as you could. My kind can be intentively cruel, but you mortals wallow in the banality of your evil.
Why did this happen? Who did we ever harm? Why did my husband have to die?
You are mortals. Dying is what you do best.
Would you like to join him? Get away from her, Valmar.
I know you. Why is that?
Because there is still enough of my son in you to heed my voice. Mother, please help me. Kai, he was dying. I didn't know what else to do. You let the beast out.
You stand in the ruins of your lives and dare call me a beast? Those that did this, they did it for spite, for horror and the pleasure it gave them. They are the true beasts.
Gimela, you have to run. Its lust for death is feeding the fire of Valmar's grief. Kai? Please run. It lives to kill. I am losing Val to its hate. I will not fear my son.
Your son is gone. There is only Varus. He who was born in the wrath of a world's annihilation.
You lie. He is still within you. I feel his pain and his anger. Val, do not listen to the beast. You have to fight it. Mother, I cannot. I have to kill those who did this. I will avenge what happened here. No, vengeance only begets more death. My son would not want that.
You are wrong. That is exactly what he wants. And I will give it to him. A blind man could follow these warriors. Who are they?
Noxians. Savages from across the sea. They live only to fight and conquer.
I like them already. 53 men. Enough to slave your thirst for vengeance. For now. I smell mortals ahead. By swift flowing waters.
Noxian?
Men not of this land. The blood of your heartlight is upon them. Yes, these are the men we must kill.
Val, you don't need to kill anyone. They need to pay for what they did to you. I need this. No, it needs this. We do not.
Be silent, wretch. We three are bound as one. Our souls entwined.
The fort's commander is using the river as his fourth wall.
A decision he'll soon regret. These are the ones. I will make them pay. In the name of my murdered kin, your lives are forfeit. I claim the blood price on your species.
Val, do not let his hatred consume you. It's too strong. Be stronger or you will lose to it. Every death lessens you and tightens its grip on your soul.
You waste your breath, Kai. Velmar wants this. He needs it.
My life is what gives you power over Valmar. His life is what holds me to life.
And he will never let go.
He will not have to. Together we are stronger than you. I never thought we would end like this. This is not the end. I will always be with you. You promise? I do. I serve the great balance, with heart and steel, in thought and deed. What are you waiting for? Kill the Ionian bastard!
Who are you, Archer? How many more of your kind are out there? Captain Terra, stay back. This thing is not human.
My kind? You want to know how many of my kind are left? Let me tell you, we are all extinct!
The blood of Noxus protects.
Blood of Noxus? I would like to see more of it. Fight with me, Velmar. Together, we will make them pay!
No, Val! Don't listen to it! Help me, Kai! I feel you slipping away!
The call of blood is stronger than love. Kai, he will always need me more than you. Know one thing before you die, mortals. As you sought to end my race, so I will end yours. I serve the great vengeance, with blade and barb, for spite and pain! Such power I had almost forgotten. Get on your knees, mortals. It is where you belong.
A warrior of Noxus never kneels.
When I unite the five, you will all kneel, as you once did before.
I would cut my own throat before kneeling to you.
No. Let me. None of you get to live. You see, Velmar, didn't killing those men feel good? Doesn't vengeance sate your soul?
No, I feel empty. I thought I wanted this. But I am no better than you. A monster.
One yet remains. Kill this one, and our pact is sealed.
Why must they all die? What do you really want?
Vengeance, just as Velmar does.
How can this one Noxian mean anything to you?
He is mortal, and mortals betrayed my race. Now, do you understand?
Mercy, please!
Mercy? You dare ask me for mercy?
Please, I'm begging you. Please spare me. Since when does a Noxian soldier beg? I'm not a soldier. My name is Arcteras. I'm an artist, look. I'm not here to fight. My father, Kai, is dead because of you.
Kill him! He was there! His hands are bloody with murder. Kill him!
This is for Kai. No! Fight it, Val! Let go of the hate! I'm sorry, Kai. I can't. It's too strong. Too strong against us? Nothing can tear us apart. Not even this.
I made this flesh. It is mine.
No! This is our flesh. I won't let you do this. Not in my name.
Your hate for these Noxians is powerful. Kill this one, and we can burn the world for what they did to your Heartlight.
My Heartlight. Our love is stronger than its hate. You are my one and only Heartlight. You are my Heartlight. I love you. You may have made this body, but you are not its master. Go and tell your masters what awaits them in Ionia. Oh, Kai, I'm so tired. I want to hold you again. I want to go home.
Home? Mortals believe it is the center of their world. But your threads are faded, and what you seek is not there.
Who stands before me? My son or the beast? It's me, Mother. Valmar. Kai is here too. And it's... Did you cast out the beast? No, it's still inside, waiting. I thought I could come home, but that's not possible just now. Where will you go? The world is a big place, Mother. A way for me and Kai to be free of this beast must exist somewhere. Do what you must, my son. Then come home to us. We will be waiting for you with love. We walk together as one until we can be renewed to live and love again.
I will cross this world and wake my dark kin. We are 3 in 1, the one of 3. We are the arrow of retribution. We are Varus.
Varus followed a river running through the desert. Its water was gritty but drinkable. The new body he brought to bear his bow was beautiful, fast and strong, but it came with the weakness of flesh. It hungered, it thirsted. Days earlier, a crook-backed creature with a withered arm and a bird-like features had told him that this was Shurima. But that couldn't be true. The Shurima Varus remembered had been a desolate wasteland.
Was I imprisoned for so long?
He wondered. He despised the human noises his new mouth made. It sounded bestial and primitive, but at least he could speak aloud once more. As to how long he was imprisoned, it was hard to say. He retained no concept of how mortals measured time, and the bird creature hadn't recognized what he was. She had no idea how far back the Darkin War had been fought.
My kind all but destroyed this world,
he said.
And now we have been forgotten? How is that even possible?
With enough time, even the greatest horrors can fade. The voice echoed in his skull, impossible to ignore. Which one was it, Kai or Valmar? He suspected Val, but mortal minds were so simple and muddy that it was hard to tell one from another.
Any race that can forget staring into the abyss of its own extinction does not deserve to live,
said Varus. We don't forget. This was Valmar, decided Varus. Horrors became myths so we can bear to hear them, so we can learn from them and not go mad. Such a notion was ridiculous, and Varus knew he would never allow the doom of his species to fade from memory. He was about to say so when he heard noises from around a bend in the river ahead. Shouting voices, braying animals and the sound of tools on stone. He darted forward into the shadow of a toppled obelisk and scanned ahead. The new river had exposed the sunken ruins of some ancient structure, comprised of pillars and statues of animal-headed gods. Yes, this was the source of the magic he had sensed. Old magic. The kind the flame-haired queen used to enslave his kind. The kind used to imprison him beneath the rock of Ionia. 10 wolf-lean men worked the ruins, digging out hidden reliquary chambers as thick-limbed beasts of burden dragged excavated rocks from deeper inside the structure. Armed warriors wearing boiled leather breastplates and carrying hook-bladed spears guarded the perimeter. Varus grinned and vaulted onto the obelisk, drawing back on his bow as he landed. Violet light built in the crystalline weapon as it flexed. and a coruscating arrow of purple light formed in the air.
Why must you kill them?
This was Sky. He hated unnecessary killing. Varus felt his hands tremble as Sky fought to make him lower the bow.
Your kind destroyed my kin.
Said Varus, exerting his will to steady his aim.
That's the only reason I need.
He sighted along the crackling arrow as a burly warrior with a forked beard and shaven scalp saw him and yelled a warning.
So everyone you see must die?
Varus exhaled and in the space between breasts loosed the fiery arrow. It flashed through the air to pierce the bearded warrior through the heart, burning a hole clean through him. He dropped to his knees, his mouth wide with shock. Other warriors hurled spears, but Varus was already moving. He sprang from the obelisk, loosing fiery blood-red bolts from his bow. Varus hit the ground running, and 5 warriors died in as many bolts. A further 3 fell, pierced by the same crackling shaft. A hook spear swung at Varus. He dived to the side, rising to his feet and sending a pair of crimson shafts through his attacker's chest. Varus sprinted, leapt and dashed through the ruins, blazing shafts of light eviscerating his targets with absolute precision. In seconds it was over. 16 dead, and he hasn't even broken sweat. He felt the anguish of the mortal souls within him and grinned. Every death gnawed at them, weakened them and made them less able to fight him. The men excavating the ruined city fled, throwing down their tools and running for the river. Varus let them go. They were an irrelevance, and the killing of mortals without weapons always provoked the moral souls within him to rebellion. Varus entered the ruined structure, briefly glancing at a pair of jackal and crocodilian structures as he passed. Inside, it was cool but dark. The walls covered in vivid bas-reliefs depicting white discs spreading golden rays over a beautiful land. The stone floor was inscribed with a magical script that had been ancient even before the Darkin came to Runeterra.
Warding sigils, potent once, but faded,
said Varus, crossing the inscribed flagstone to where a towering statue of a great serpent-headed god had once stood sentinel. Some past catastrophe had toppled it, and beyond its sandstone remains lay a lightless chamber. Varus entered, the glow from the smoldering light at his heart revealing nothing but bare stone, burned black and glossy with ancient fire. Varus sighed.
Where are you, sister?
And that was the story of Varus. It is definitely not the longest story we ever had, but I have never seen so much hidden information in a story before. If you read the story for the second time, you'll notice so many references to so many historical points in Runeterra. This story alone helps a lot when creating a timeline for League of Legends. And that is exactly the kind of stories I love. The stories that reveal a lot of the hidden information in this world. And the best part is that we are not done yet. Aatrox, as you saw in this story, is still a huge part of the Darkin race. Or he was. And because his story is still to come, we have more Darkin lore to go through in the future. So, massive thanks goes to Quinn Boyce Bacon. He was the voice of Varus you heard here. He is insanely talented and I can't believe he didn't make it huge in the industry yet. So, all the links to all the parts of this story will be in the description, so if you feel like you missed something you can read the stories yourselves. But if you like this video, feel free to like it and subscribe for more stories. We still have the project stories on our hands and I will do that too. Also, if you'd like to get anything or send us anything, the links to merch and PO Box will be in the description as well. And of course, a massive shout out to our Patreons for supporting us and going the extra mile. And with that, thank you all so much for being here and for your support, you know I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you again. and welcome back to another one of these videos where we have a look at the interactions of a new champion or newly released champion. This time it is going to be Aatrox, and even though it looks like I'm streaming, I am not streaming, I am doing this only for YouTube, even though we are gonna talk about these interactions on the Sunday stream, where we are gonna have a look at Aatrox quite a bit more, because let's be honest, those of you guys who saw the interactions already, you know that there is a lot of material for theories about pretty much everything that we didn't know how it would work. So I'm just gonna call it now. Gale, Morgana, we're gonna talk about those as well. Pantheon, the Darkin, the Void, all of these things are getting connected through Aatrox. So let's get right into this. First of all, for obvious reasons, full credit goes to Skin Spotlight. We wouldn't be able to do jack without them.
Mastery. I must congratulate you. Obviously, your parents never had reason to.
Let's start with a couple of jokes. That's nothing but jokes. Okay, sometimes there are jokes that don't have to do anything with the lore.
Varus, V-A-R-U-S. Your name should have an A and then another A. Varus, there was a memo, Varus. There was a memo.
Just like this one. I'm just quickly gonna say, okay, I will talk about his design while I'm doing this at the same time. I like how they took Aatrox and they moved him to be closer to the other Darkin. For example, you can notice that the new voice Aatrox has is very similar to someone like Rast, but I see an issue here, and that is that I always thought that Aatrox would be this massive, and as he is now called, the World Ender, you know, this not overly confident guy, but someone who is mean but not crazy. I always thought that because Aatrox always looked angelic and more like a demonic angel, I don't know if there's a word for that, but I always thought that Aatrox saw a noble cause in what he was doing. And now that is completely gone. Completely gone. Aatrox is more of a madman now, and I am not sure if I like it. Also, some of you guys were asking me what do I think about his new accent, because let's be honest, Aatrox is semi-Russian and semi-German now. He's like something in between. I find it weird, to be honest, because accents in real life, for example, the way why I talk like a broken squeaky toy, is because there are countries that have different languages, and those different languages prefer your vocals to behave a certain way. That's why accents exist in the first place. Now, this wouldn't make sense for Aatrox, because why would the Darkin have different accents? Some of you guys said that it might be because maybe the vessel or the body that he has, maybe that body had, you know, different accent because it was from a different region. I would say no to that, because in this form, Aatrox is basically in exactly the same form as someone like Rast, and Rast has his own voice once he gets completed. Once he transforms into Rast, he's not using Kain anymore, and he's using his own voice, and he does not have a voice anywhere close to Aatrox. So that's just my comment on the voice, but now let's get into this.
We all agreed on the double A thing, Varus. The double A thing.
I know this is just a joke, but I wonder if Riot will actually make every new Darkin from now on have double A.
A scythe? A scythe? Are you planning on murdering fields of wheat?
I like how, I don't know if this like directly confirms it, because this is more like a joke, but it feels like Aatrox is saying that the Darkin were able to actually choose weapons, which means that they really were sealed inside their own weapons. They weren't sealed inside a weapon that dang it, I just forgot the name, the Golden Warrior Queen, you know, when she sealed them, she didn't seal them inside Shuriman weapons. She actually sealed the Darkin inside their own weapons.
I chose a sword, the noblest weapon, Rast. You. Seriously, I don't understand.
Also, just a
Were
joke.
you trapped in the gardening section?
Just a joke.
I will find a way to tear down the heavens and reveal you as fiends.
After munching, after puffing, beat bacteria, breath would swish. After sipping, boss is calling. Beat
Hello everyone and welcome! Today I got a very special story for you, and thus I will present it in a unique way. Today we will talk about the fall of Icathia, which was a major event that changed the course of Runeterra's history. The way this story is written reminds me less of a short story and more of a chapter from a book. That's why I decided to leave out the graphics and focus more on the sound effects to support the narrative. After all, 50% of a good story is your imagination, and I don't want to affect it with the graphics I use. So you're free to relax or do anything else you want to do, as you don't need to watch the screen. So without further ado, let's have a look at one of the greatest turning points in Runeterra's history. Where Icathia Once Stood, by Graham McNeil. My name is Aksamuk Varchoi Koari Ikathor. Aksamuk was my grandsire's name, a warrior's name. It means keeper of edges, and it is an auspicious title to bear. Aksamuk was the last of the Mage Kings, the final ruler to fall before the Shuriman Sun Empress when she led her golden host of men and gods into the kingdom of Icathia. Var is my mother, and Choi my father. Ikathor is the name of the blood-bonded clan to which I was born, one with an honorable history of service to the Mage Kings. I have borne these names since birth. My name is Aksamuk Varchoi Koari Ikathor. Only Koari is a new addition. The fit is new, but already feels natural. The name is now part of me. I bear it with a pride that burns bright in my heart. The Koari were once the life wards of the Mage Kings, deadly warriors who dedicated their lives to the service of their master. When Aksamuk the king fell before the gold warriors of the Sun Empress, and Icathia became a vassal state of Shurima, every one of them fell upon their swords. But the Koari are reborn, rising to serve the new Mage King and reclaim their honor. I bear their sigil branded on my arm, the scroll-wrapped sword. My name is Aksamuk Varchoi Koari Ikathor. I repeat it over and over, holding on to what it represents. I do not want to forget it. It is all I have left. Was it only this morning I and the rest of the reformed Koari marched through the streets of Icathia? It seems like a lifetime ago. The wide thoroughfares were thronged with thousands of cheering men, women and children, clad in their brightest cloth and wearing their finest jewelry to honor our march. They had come to witness the rebirth of their kingdom. For it was Icathia that was reborn today, not just the Koari. Our heads were high, my chest swollen with pride. We marched in step, gripping the leather straps of wicker shields and the wire-wound hilts of our curved Nimcha blades. To bear Icathian armament had been forbidden under Shuriman law, but enough had been brought in secret forges and hidden in caches throughout the city, in readiness for the day of uprising. I remember that day well. The city had been filled with screams, as baying crowds chased and murdered every Shuriman official they could find. Resentment for centuries of humiliating laws intended to eradicate our culture, and brutal executions for breaking those laws, came to a head in one blood-filled day of violence. It didn't matter that most of these people were merely scriveners, merchants, and tithe-takers. They were servants of the hated Sun Emperor, and needed to die. Overnight, Icathia was ours again. Sun-disk effigies were pulled from the rooftops and smashed by cheering crowds. Shuriman script work was burned and their treasuries looted, and statues of dead emperors were desecrated. And even I defaced one of the great Forscoes with obscenities that would have made my mother blush. I remember the smell of smoke and fire. It was the smell of freedom. I held to that feeling as we marched. My memory recalled the smiling faces and the cheers, but I could not pick out any words. The sunlight was too bright, the noise too intense, and the pounding in my head unrelenting. I had not slept the previous night, too nervous at the prospect of battle. My skill with the Nimcha was average, but I was deadly with the recurved serpent bow slung at my shoulder. Its wood was well seasoned, protected from the humidity by a coat of red lacquer. My arrows were fletched with azure raptor feathers, and I had carved their piercing heads from razored obsidian, sourced from the thaumaturges, the magicers of earth and rock. Long runs through Icathia's lush, coastal forests and along its high mountain trails had given me powerful clean limbs to draw the bowstring, and stamina to fight all day. A young girl, her hair braided with silver wire, and with the deepest green eyes I had ever seen, placed a garland of flowers over my head. The scent of the blossoms was intoxicating, but I forgot it all as she pulled me close to kiss my lips. She wore a necklace, an opal set in swirling loop of gold, and I smiled as I recognized my father's craft. I tried to hold on to her, but our march carried me away. Instead, I fixed her face in my mind. I cannot remember it now, only her eyes. Deep green like the forests of my youth. Soon, even that will be gone.
Say, Axa,
said Saijek Scully Rings Koari Ikathun, popping a freshly shelled egg into his mouth.
She'll be waiting for you when this day is done.
Aye, said Colgrim Evil Essa Koari Ikathun, jabbing his elbow into my side. Him and 20 other strapping young lads. I blushed at Colgrim's words, and he laughed. Craft her a fine necklace from Shuriman gold, he continued. Then she'll be yours forever, or at least until morning. I should have said something to berate Colgrim for slighting this girl's honor, but I was young and eager to prove myself to these veteran warriors. Syjax was the beating heart of the Koari, a shaven-headed giant with skin pocked by the ravages of a childhood illness, and a forked beard stiff to points with wax and white chalk. Colgrim was his right hand, a brute with cold eyes and betrothal tattoo, though I had never heard him talk of his wife. These men had grown up together and had learned the secret ways of the warrior since they were old enough to hold a blade. But I was new to this. My father had trained me as a leopard.
Don't forget to set goal when you're staying at home. Buy now. Huawei Watch Face with 10 days battery life in 4,999 pesos. Get exclusive Cantaloupe Orange color version at Huawei store and find more exciting offers.
The female Y-zone always needs meticulous care and must be cared for from a young age. Children need cleansing solution exclusively for children. Kids and Mom's sensitive cleanser for daily. For infants, a milder and safer cleanser must be used. Baby Diaper Inner Cleanser. The cleverest choice for child and mother to be healthier together. Corey in J Island.
Lapidary, an artisan of gemstones and maker of jewelry, a meticulous and fastidious man. Such coarse language was anathema to him, and unfamiliar to me. I relished it, of course, eager to fit it in these leather-tough men.
Go easy on the lad, Colgrim,
said Syjax, slapping my back with one of his massive hands. Meant as a brotherly pat, it rattled my teeth in my skull, but I welcomed it all the same.
He'll be a hero by nightfall.
He shifted the long axe-headed polearm slung to his shoulder. The weapon was immense, its ebony haft carved with the names of his forebearers, and the blade a slab of razor-edged bronze. Few of our groups could even lift it, but Syjax was a master of weapons. I turned to catch a last glimpse of my green-eyed girl, but I could not see her amid the tightly packed ranks of soldiers and the waving arms of the crowds.
Time to focus, Axa,
said Syjax.
The scryers say the Shurimans are less than a half a day's march from Icathia.
Are the gold warriors with them? I asked.
So they say, lad. So they say.
Is it wrong that I can't wait to see them? Syjax shook his head.
No, for they are mighty. But as soon as you do,
You'll wish you hadn't. I did not understand Sidejax's meaning and said, why? He gave me a sidelong glance. Because they are monsters. Have you seen one? I was filled with youthful enthusiasm, but I still remember the look that passed between Sidejax and Colgrim. I have, Axa, said Sidejax. We fought one at Bizek. We had to topple half a mountain to put the big bastard down, Colgrim added. And even then, only Sidejax had a weapon big enough to take its head off. I remember the tale with a thrill of excitement. That was you? Sidejax nodded, but said nothing, and I knew to ask no more. The corpse had been paraded around the newly liberated city for all to see, proof that the Shriman's god warriors could still die. My father had not wanted me to see it, fearing it would inflame the desire to rebel that had smoldered in every Icathian heart for centuries. The memory of exactly what it looked like is gone now, but I remember it was enormous beyond belief, inhuman and terrible. I would see the god warriors later that day, and then I understood Sidejax's meaning. We formed up on the gentle slopes before the crumbling remains of the city's walls. Since the coming of the Sun Empress, over 1,000 years ago, we had been forbidden to reclaim the stone or rebuild the wall, forced to leave the rubble as a reminder of our ancient defeat. But now, an army of stonewrights, laborers and thaumaturges were hefting giant blocks of freshly hewn granite into place with windlass mechanism that crackled with magic. I felt pride at the sight of the rising walls. Icathia was being reborn in glory right before my eyes. More immediately impressive was the army taking position athwart the hard-packed earthen road leading into the city. 10,000 men and women, clad in armor of boiled leather and armed with axes, picks and spears. The forges had worked day and night to produce swords, shields and arrowheads in the days following the uprising. But there was only so much that could be produced before the Sun Emperor turned his gaze upon the rebellious satrapy and marched east. I had seen pictures of ancient Icathian armies in the forbidden texts. Brave warriors arrayed in serried ranks of gold and silver, and thought we were a shadow of such forces. We were no less proud. 2,000 Talon riders were deployed on either flank, their scaled feathered mounts snorting and stamping clawed hoofs with impatience. 1,000 archers knelt in 2 long lines 50 feet ahead of us, blue-fledged shafts planted in the soft loam before them. 3 blocks of deep-ranked infantry formed the bulk of our line, a bulwark of courage to repel our ancient oppressors. All down our line, crackling energies from the earthcraft of our mages made the air blurry. The Shrimans would surely bring mages, but we could counter their power with magic of our own. I have never seen so many warriors, I said. Colgrim shrugged. None of us have. Not in our lifetimes. Don't get too impressed, said Syjax. The Sun Emperor has 5 armies, and even the least of them would outnumber us 3 to 1. I tried to imagine such a force, and failed. How do we defeat such a host? I asked. Syjax did not answer me, but led the Koari to our place in the line before the stepped structure of granite blocks. Shuriman corpses were impaled upon wooden stakes driven into the earth at its base, and flocks of carrion birds circled overhead. A silken pavilion of crimson and indigo had raised at its summit, and I could not see what lay within. Robed priests surrounded it, each one waving intricate patterns in the air with their star medal staves. I did not know what they were doing, but I heard an insistent buzzing sound, like a hive of insects trying to push their way into my skull. The pavilion's outline rippled like a desert mirage, and I had to look away as my eyes began to water. My teeth felt loose in their gums, and my mouth filled with the taste of soured milk. I gagged and wiped the back of my hand across my lips, surprised and not a little alarmed to see a smear of blood there. "What is that?" I asked. "What's in there?" Syjax shrugged. "A new weapon, I heard. Something the thaumaturges found deep underground, after the earthquake at Sabra." "What kind of weapon?" "Does it matter?" said Colgrim. "They say it's going to wipe the gold-armored dung-eaters from the world, even those thrice-damned gold warriors." The sun was close to its zenith by now, but a shiver worked its way down my spine. My mouth was suddenly dry. I could feel tingling in my fingertips. Was it fear? Perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a premonition of what was to come. An hour later, the Shriman army arrived. I had never seen such a host, nor ever imagined so many men could be gathered together in one place. Columns of dust created clouds that rose like a gathering storm set to sweep the mortal realm away. And then, through the dust, I saw the bronze spears of the Shriman warriors, filling my sight in all directions. They marched forward, a vast line of fighting men with golden banners and sun-disk totems glimmering in the noonday sun. From the slopes above, we watched wave after wave come into sight, tens of thousands of men who had never known defeat, and whose ancestors had conquered the known world. Riders on golden mounts rode the flanks, and hundreds of floating chariots roved ahead of the army. Heavy wagons the size of river barracks bore strange war machines that resembled navigational astrolabes, Spinning globes orbited by flaming spheres and crackling lightning. Robed priests came with them, each with a flame-topped staff and an entourage of blinded slaves. At the heart of the army were the God Warriors. Much else faded from my mind. The blood, the horror and the fear. But the sight of the God Warriors will follow me into whatever lies beyond this moment. I saw 9 of them, towering over the men they led. Their features and bodies were an awful blend of human and animal, and things that had never walked this world, and never should. Armored in bronze and jade, they were titans, inhuman monsters that defied belief. Their leader, with skin as pale and smooth as ivory, turned her monstrous head towards us. Enclosed in a golden helm carved to resemble a roaring lion, her face was mercifully hidden, but I could feel her power as she swept her scornful gaze across our line. A palpable wave of terror followed in its wake. Our army shrank from the scale of the enemy force, on the brink of fleeing before even a single blow was struck. Steadying shouts arose from our brave leaders, and an immediate rout was halted. But even I could hear the fear in their voices. I too felt an almost uncontrollable urge to void my bladder, but clamped.
Oh my god.
The first family of TV are back.
Ready or not, here we come.
In a brand new season.
Don't ever come at me like that. I swear to God.
Relive every season. Oh! Every episode.
Life-changing.
Upgrade your reality. Start your free trial now.
Get exclusive Cantaloupe Orange color version at Huawei store and find more exciting offers.
Down on the feeling. I was Kowari. I wouldn't piss myself in my first battle. Even so, my hands were clammy, and I felt a sickening knot forming in my gut. I wanted to run. I needed to run. We could not possibly stand against such a force. Big bastards, aren't they? Said Colgrim. A nervous laughter rippled throughout our ranks. My fear lessened.
They may look like gods,
said Syjax, his voice carrying far and wide.
but they are mortal. They can bleed, and they can die.
I took strength from his words, but I wonder now if he knew just how wrong he was.
We are Icathians,
he roared.
We are the heirs of kings and queens who first settled this land. It is ours by right and by birth. Aye, we are outnumbered, but the warriors our enemies have sent are slaves, and men whose only loyalty is to coin.
He raised his weapon high and the sunlight shone from its polished blade. He was glorious in that moment, and I would have followed him to the very end of the world if he asked me to.
We fight to live in freedom, not in slavery. This is our home, and it is a land of proud people, of free people. There is nothing stronger than that, and we will prevail.
A cheer began in the Koari ranks, and was swiftly carried to the other regiment in our army.
Ikathia! Ikathia!
It echoed from the rising walls of our city, and was carried to the Shuriman host. The God Warriors spoke swiftly to their attendants, who turned and ran to bear their orders to the wings of the army. Almost immediately, our enemy began to move uphill. They came slowly, their pace deliberate. On every third step, the warriors hammered the hafts of their spears on their shields. The noise was profoundly unraveling, a slow drumbeat that sapped the will of we who were soon to feel the tips of those blades. My mouth was dry, my heart hammered in my chest. I looked to Syjax for strength, to take courage from his indomitable presence. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. This was a soul who knew no fear. He rejected doubt and stood firm in the face of destiny. Sensing my gaze, he glanced down at me.
Egg?
He said. A pair of peeled eggs lay in the palm of his hand. I shook my head. I couldn't eat. Not now.
I'll take an egg,
said Colgrim, taking one and biting it in half. Syjax ate the other, and the pair of them chewed thoughtfully. The Shrimans drew ever closer. Good egg, noted Colgrim.
I add a dash of vinegar as I boil them,
Syjax replied.
Makes them easier to peel.
Clever.
Thanks.
I looked back and forth between them, unable to reconcile the mundane nature of their words, as an all-conquering army marched upon us. And yet, I felt soothed by it. I laughed, and that laughter swiftly spread. The Koari were laughing, and soon, without knowing why, our entire army was laughing. The fear that had threatened to undo all of us now fled. Fresh resolve filled our hearts, and put iron into our sword arms. The Shuremans halted 200 yards away from us. I tasted a strange texture in the air, like biting on tin. I look up in time to see the spinning globes of the war machines burn with searing light. The priests attending them sweep their staves down. One of the flaming spheres detached from the globe and arced through the air towards us. It landed in the midst of our infantry and burst in an explosion of pellucid green fire and screams. Another sphere followed, then another. I gagged as the smell of roasting flesh billowed from the ranks, horrified at the carnage being wrought. But our warriors held firm. More of the spheres arced towards us, but instead of striking our ranks, they wobbled in the air before reversing the course to smash down in the heart of the Shuriman spearmen. Amazed, I saw our thaumaturges holding their staves aloft, and crackling lines of magic flickered between them. The hairs on my arms and legs stood up in the shimmering air, as if a veil was being drawn up around us. More of the searing fireballs launched from the Shuriman war machines, but they exploded in midair, striking the invisible barrier woven around our force. Cheers overcame the cries of pain in our ranks. I let out a breath, thankful that I had not been among the war machine's targets. I watched those piteously wounded men dragged to the rear by their comrades. The temptation to remain there must have been tremendous, but we Icathians descend from explorer kings, and not a single warrior failed to return to their place in the battle line. The strain on our mages was clear, but their power was holding the Shuriman barrage at bay. I glanced over my shoulder to the pavilion atop the pyramid. There too, the priests were straining with all their power. To what end I could not imagine. What manner of weapon lay within, and when would we unleash it?
"Stands to,"
said Sygex, and I returned my attention to the army before us.
"They'll come at us now, a big wave to test us."
I looked back at the Shuremans, who now came at us in a run. Arrows flashed from the lines of archers ranged before us, and scores of the enemy warriors died. Bronze plate and shield saved some, but the range was so close that many fell with shafts punched clean through their breastplates. Another volley hammered the Shuremans, swiftly followed by another. Hundreds were down. Their line was ragged and disorganized.
"Now!"
roared Sygex.
"Into them!"
Our infantry surged forward in a wedge, spears lowering as they charged. I was carried by the mass of men behind me, managing to drag my blade from its sheath as I ran. I screamed to keep my fear at bay, worrying that I might trip on my scabbard. I saw the faces of the Shuremans, the braids in their hair, the gold of their crests, and the blood smearing their tunics. We were so close I could have whispered and they might have heard me. We struck their wavering ranks like a thunderbolt. Spears thrust and shivered, half splintering with the impact. Driven by sheer will and 1,000 years of pent-up anger, the momentum of our charge clove deep into their ranks, splitting them and breaking their formation completely. Anger gave me strength, and I swung my sword. It bit into flesh and blood sprayed me. I heard screaming. It might have been me, I cannot say for sure. I tried to stay close to Sygex and Colgrim, knowing that where they fought, Shuremans would be dying. I saw Sygex felling men by the dozen with his huge polearm, but could no longer see Colgrim. I soon lost sight of Sygex in the hafe and sway of surging warriors. I called his name, but my shout was drowned in the roar of battle. Bodies slammed into me, pulling at me, clawing my face. Icathian hands or Shuriman, I had no idea. A spear stabbed towards my heart, but the tip slid from my breastplate to slice across my arm. I remember pain, but little else. I hammered my sword into a screaming Shuriman's face. He fell and I pushed on, made fearless by fear and savage joy. I soared and swung my sword like a madman, Skill was meaningless. I was a butcher hacking meat. I saw men die whose skill was much greater than mine. I kept moving, lost in the swirling tide of flesh and bone. Wherever I saw an exposed neck or back, I struck. I took grim pleasure in my killing. Whatever the outcome of this day, I could hold my head high in the company of warriors. More arrows flew overhead, and the cheers rising from our army were songs of freedom. And then the Shuremans broke. It began as a single slave warrior turning his back and running, but his panic spread like fire on the plain, and soon the whole formation was streaming back down the hill. In the days leading up to this moment, Sygex had told me that the most dangerous moment for any warrior is when a regiment breaks. Then the killing truly begins. We tore through the routed Shuremans, spears plunging into exposed backs, and axes splitting skulls. They were no longer fighting back, simply trampling one another to escape. The bloodshed was appalling, yet I reveled in it as hundreds of bodies were crushed in the slaughter. I saw Sygex again then, standing firm, his polearm at his side. "Hold!" he yelled. "Hold!" I wanted to curse his timidity. Our blood was up, and the Shuremans were fleeing in panic. I did not know it at the time, but Sygex had seen how dangerous our position truly was. "Pull back!" he shouted, and the cry was taken up by others who saw what he had seen. At first, it seemed like our army would not heed his words. Drunk on victory and eager to plunge onward, we were
Dry and rough underarms from shaving? Our solution is Dove, enriched with 1/4 moisturizing cream. Dove deodorant is proven to be 2 times more nourishing for visibly softer, smoother underarms, even after shaving.
Di pwedeng mahina ang aking anak. Sa dami ng posibleng sakit ngayong panahon, kailangan malakas ang kanyang immunity. Kaya binibigyan ko siya ng Vitaminized Lactum 3+. Bukod sa key nutrients for brain and bone development, may immunonutrients para tulungang palakasin ang kanyang immunity. To help strengthen his immunity, Vitaminized Lactum 3+.
Bent on slaying every one of the enemy, wreaking vengeance upon soldiers who had held our land hostage for centuries. I had not seen the danger, but all too soon I understood. Screams and fountains of blood sheeted from the leading edges of our battle line. Severed heads flew backwards, spinning like rocks skipping over a pool. Bodies soon followed, tossed aside without effort. Screams and cries of terror erupted, and the songs of freedom were snuffed out. The god warriors had entered the fray. 3 of them surged into our ranks, some moving like men, others like ravenous beasts. Each was armed with a weapon larger than any man could lift, unstoppable and invincible. They waded through our ranks with sweeping blows that slew a dozen men with every swing. Icathians flew in pieces from their crackling blades. They were crushed beneath their thread, or were rent asunder like bloody rags. "Back!" shouted Sygex. "Back to the walls!" None could pierce the god warriors' armor, and their ferocity was so primal, so inhuman, that it froze me on the spot. Spears snapped against their iron-hard hides, and their bellowing roars cut me to the marrow with terror. One, a cawing beast with ragged feathered wings and a vulture-like beak, leapt into the air, and searing blue fire blazed from its outstretched claws. I cried out at the sight of my fellow countrymen burned to ash. The elation that had only moments before filled us with thoughts of victory and glory, now shattered like a fallen glass. In its place, I felt a sick horror of torments yet to come. The retribution of an unimaginably cruel despot who knows no mercy. I felt a hand grab my shoulder, and lifted my bloodied blade. "Move, Aksa," said Sygex, forcing me back. "There's still fighting to be done." I was dragged along by the force of his grip, barely able to keep my feet. I wept as we streamed back to where we had first formed up. Our line was broken, and surely the day was lost. But the god warrior simply stood among the dead, not even bothering to pursue. "You said we had a weapon!" I cried.
Why aren't they doing anything? They are, said Sygex. Look. What happened next defies my understanding. No mortal eye had ever seen such a thing. The pavilion exploded with forking traces of light. Arcing loops of purple energy rippled into the sky and lashed down like crashing waves. The force of the blast threw everyone to the ground. I covered my ears as a deafening screaming tore the air. I pressed myself to the battle-churned earth as the wail buried deep into my skull. I thought the world itself was shrieking in horror. I rolled onto my side, retching as stabbing nausea ripped through my belly. The sky, once bright and blue, was now the color of week-old bruise. Unnatural twilight held sway, and I saw flickering afterimages burn themselves onto the back of my mind. Slashing claws, gaping maws, all-seeing eyes. I sobbed in terror at the sight of such horrors. Alone of all the things being stripped from me, this I gladly surrender. A nightmarish light, sickly blue and ugly purple, smothered the world, pressing down from above and blooming from somewhere below. I pushed myself upright, turning in a slow circle as the world ended around me. The Shurimans were streaming back from the city, terrified by whatever force our priests had unleashed. My enemies were being destroyed. I knew I should be triumphal, but this was not a victory any sane person could revel in. This was extinction. An abyss that bled purple light tore open amid the Shurimans, and I saw their ivory-skinned general overcome by whipping cords of matter. She fought to free herself with wild sweeps of her blade, but the power we had unleashed was too much for her. The pulsing glowing light spread over her body like a hideous cocoon. Everywhere I looked, I saw the same slick coils rising from the earth, or from the very air itself, to seize the flesh of mortals. Men and women were swept up and enveloped. I saw one Shuriman clawing his way over the earth, his body seeming to dissolve as the tendrils of foul energy overwhelmed him. I began to hope, to pray, that this doom was what had been planned all along. I saw shapes in the flickering light, too fast and too indistinct to make out clearly. Stretching, swelling limbs of strange star-like matter. Men were clawed from their feet and pulled apart. I heard the gurgling, hooting bellows of the things never meant to walk the surface of this world. As awful as this day had become, I wondered if this was the price of the great weapon our priests had unleashed. I hardened my heart to the suffering of the Shurimans and remembered the centuries of misery they had heaped upon us. Once again, I had lost sight of Sygex and Colgrim, but I no longer needed their presence to steady me. I had proved myself worthy of my grandsire's name, worthy of the brand on my arm. I was Koari. The sky groaned and buckled, sounding like a vast sailcloth tearing in a storm. I turned and ran back to the city, joining up with other soldiers. I saw the same desperate, horrified looks on their faces I knew must be on mine. Had we won? None of us knew. The Shurimans were gone, swallowed whole by the terror we had unleashed upon the world. I felt no regret, no remorse. My horror had given way to justification. I had lost my Nimcha blade somewhere in the frenzy of the battle, so I took my bow from my shoulder and pumped it up to the sky. Ikathia! I yelled. Ikathia! The chant was taken up again by the soldiers around me, and we stopped to watch the enemy finally overcome. The seething mass of matter that had consumed them lay like a shroud over the flesh it had consumed. Its surface was undulant, and swelling blisters of glistening matter burst open with frothing birth sacs that twisted and unfolded like newborn animals. I turned as I heard a deafening grinding of rock. Booming cracks echoed as more and more chasms tore the landscape open. I dropped to my knees as the earth shook, and the walls of Ikathia, fallen once and now rising again, were shattered by the groaning base stone that split the earth. Geysers of dust and smoke erupted from within the city. I saw men screaming, but could not hear them over the crash of falling rock and splitting earth.
Towers and palaces that had stood since the first Mage King planted his star metal staff were swallowed whole by the ever-widening chasms. Only rubble and shattered fragments remained, my beloved city reduced to a charred skeleton. Fire sped skyward, and the wails of my people were somehow magnified by the canyons of the city as they fell into the hideous doom below. Icathia! I screamed one last time. I saw a flash of movement, and flinched as somehow flew through the air above me. I recognized the vulture-headed god warrior from earlier in the battle. Its flight was erratic, its limbs already partially ruined and unmade by the strange matter splitting from the rents of the earth. It flew towards the pavilion with desperate beats of its ravaged wings, and I knew I had to stop it. I ran towards the towering creature, knocking an obsidian-tipped arrow to my bow. The thing stumbled as it landed. Its legs were twisted and its back was alive with devouring tendrils. Feathers and skin sludged from its head as it limped past the dead bodies of the priests, whose own flesh bubbled and roiled with internal motion. Fire built around the god warrior's hands, ready to burn the pavilion with the last of its power. Sygex had said the Sun Emperor had more armies, and we would need our weapon intact if we were to defeat them. I drew back the bowstring. An obsidian arrow aimed at the god warrior. I loosed, and the arrow sped through, punching through the dissolving matter of its skull. The god warrior fell, and the fire faded from its hands. It rolled onto its side, the flesh falling from its bones. I saw threads of sinew, pallid matter forming beneath. The god warrior sensed my presence, and turned its vulturine head to me. One of its eyes was milky and distended by growths of strange fungus-like substance spreading across its skull. The other had my arrow protruding through it. Do you even know what you have done, foolish Icathian? The blind god warrior mangled, its voice a wet growl of dissolving vocal cords. I sought to think of some powerful words. All I could think of was the truth. We freed ourselves, I said. You have opened the door to a place that should never be opened. It hissed. You have doomed us all. Time for you to die, I said. The god warrior tried to laugh, but what came out was a gurgling death rattle. Die? No. What is to come will be far worse. It will be as if none of us ever existed. I left the arrow embedded in the god warrior's skull. Men were limping back from the battle, bloodied and weary, with the same look of incredulous horror in their eyes. None of us truly understood what had happened, but the Shurimans were dead, and that was enough, wasn't it? We milled in confusion, none of us knowing what to say or do. The landscape before the city was twisting with unnatural motion, the flesh of the Shuriman army utterly obscured by the pale coiling ropes of hideous matter. Its surface was darkening as I watched, splitting where it hardened like some form of carapace, vicious ichor spilling out, and more I had the impression that this was just the beginning of something far worse. Light still spilled from the colossal rents torn in the ground, and alien sounds, a mix of shrieking, hissing and crazy howls, echoed from far below. I could feel the tremors rising up from the bowels of the earth, like the slow grinding of bedrock that presaged an earthquake. "What's down there?" said a man I didn't know. His arm was all but encased in a translucent coal that was slowly creeping its way up the side of his neck. I wonder if he even knew. Sounds like a nest, or a lair, or something. I did not know what hideous things lived down there, nor did I want to know. I heard a voice call my name. I looked up to see Sygex limping toward me. His face was a mask of blood, thanks to the jagged wound that ran down from above his right eye to his jawline. I hadn't thought Sygex could bleed at all. "You're hurt," I said. "It's far worse than it looks." "Is this the end?" I asked him. "For Icathia, I fear it is," he replied, moving away to grab the bridle of a cavalryman's mount. The beast was skittish, but Saijek's hold its reins and vaulted into the saddle. I would have given everything to see the Shurimans defeated, I murmured. I fear we just did, said Saijek. But we won. The Shurimans are dead, but I'm not sure that's the same thing, said Saijek. Now find a mount, we have to go. Go? What are you talking about? Ikathia is doomed, he said. You see that, don't you? Not just the city, but our land. Look around you. That will be our fate too. I knew he was right, but the idea of simply riding away? I didn't know if I could. Ikathia is my home, I said. There's nothing left of Ikathia, or at least there won't be soon. He extended his hand to take mine, and I shook it. Aksa, he said, casting a glance back at the creeping horror. There is no hope here. I shook my head and said, I was born here, and I will die here. Then hold to who you are while you still can, lad. He said, and I felt the weight of his sadness and guilt. It's all you have left. Saijek turned his mount and rode away. I never saw him again. My name is Aksamuk Varchoikoari Ikathor. I think Aksamuk was my grandsire's name. It has meaning, but I can no longer remember what. I wandered to the ruins where a great city once stood. All that is left is an impossibly white crater, rubble, and a tear in the fabric of the world. I feel a terrible emptiness before me. Aksamuk was a king, I think. I do not remember where. Was it here? In this ruined sunken city? I do not know what Var or Choi mean. Ikathor should have a meaning to me, but whatever it was is gone. There is a terrible void where my mind and memories once dwelled. My name is Aksamuk Varchoi Koari. Koari? What is that? There is a mark on my arm, a sword wrapped in a scroll. Is that a slave mark? Was I the property of a conqueror? I remember a girl with green eyes and an opal necklace. Who was she? Was she my wife? My sister? A daughter? I do not know, but I remember the smell of her flowers. My name is Aksamuk Varchoi. I repeated it over and over, holding on to it as if it can stave off this slow dissolution. I do not want to forget it. It is all I have left. My name is Aksamuk. I am being erased. I know this, but I do not know why or how. Something awful writhes within me. All that I am is unraveling. I am being undone. My name is... my name. My...
Dreaming of nature's power? Power that exudes lusciousness and blooms with richness. Find it in new Cream Silk Rich Organic Power Fusion. A fusion of luxurious oils and rich organic balms for naturally luscious and moisturized hair. Indulge in the power of nature. New Cream Silk Rich Organic Power Fusion.
Conditioned luscious. Naturally powered.
Availing your favorite Giga or other promos? Or checking your balance?
Easy. Simplify it with 1, 2, 3. First, dial *123 hashtag and check if you have enough load. Just buy via any smart retailer if your balance comes up short. Go big with Smart Power Giga, perfect if you plan on getting high-speed access to games, video, social media, and more. Or you can keep it classic with calls and texts for constant connections on the go. Just select other offers. Keep track of your usage and balance under this menu too. Every transaction you will have a confirmation. Wait for yours, then you're all set. This is the same sun made better. Because you matter, mga maayong butang ang moabot nimo.
Hello everyone and welcome! As we keep crossing champions off of our Piltover and Zone list, we get more and more detail about the machinery and inventions our champions work with. And today we will expand it with the story of Jace. Jace was a fortunate child, for he was blessed with perfect circumstances. Being born in Piltover with incredible intelligence opened many windows for him. He was raised up under principles that made the city great. Invention, discovery, not going to Zone if possible. With his talent for understanding machinery, Jace became the youngest apprentice to ever join Clan Gyopara, one of Piltover's most respected ruling clans. He spent most of his early years constructing potential hextech devices and transformable multi-tools for Piltover's workers. A wrench that transformed into a pry bar, a pickaxe that could morph into a shovel, a hammer that could turn into a demolition beam. But most of them required more powerful batteries. Most things came easy to Jace, and he could never understand why his colleagues had so much trouble with what to him were simple concepts. As a result, nearly everyone who worked with Jace found him arrogant, dismissive, and unwilling to slow his pace to help others. As time went on, his patience became shorter and his behavior worse. Only one person ever matched Jace's intelligence, all while keeping the same level of superior attitude. His name was Victor. The two met each other at a mandatory Progress Day party and immediately bonded over how little either of them wanted to be there. They started working together shortly after. Victor expanded Jace's intellectual horizons and questioned his every decision. Jace wanted to improve humanity through his versatile technology, while Victor worked on humanity's bigger problems. He focused on physical decay or illogical prejudices. They constantly argued, but it never got personal. They both knew their ultimate goals were the same, even if their methods were different. More than that, they both knew what it was to be shunned by their colleagues. Victor because of his unconventional thinking, Jace because of his rudeness. Together, Jace and Victor invented a mechanized construction suit for the dock workers. It was hard enough to enhance the worker's strength, but light enough not to drown him immediately if he fell overboard. But things changed when Victor came in with the newest version of the suit. It required a Chemtech implant that would increase strength output by tenfold, while also preventing them from getting tired, panicking, or disobeying instructions. While Victor saw this feature as a brilliant idea to reduce the frequency of construction accidents, for Jace it was immoral to take away someone's free will. The two almost fought each other over the following argument, and in the end, Jace warned the Academy of Victor's invention. After that, Victor was stripped of his honors and was kicked from Piltover's scientific community. Victor was the closest thing Jace ever had to a real friend, and now he went back to working alone, and even became more isolated. As Jace studied on his own, Clan Gyopara's explorers discovered a raw blue crystal deep within Shuriman's deserts. Though Jace volunteered to experiment on it, specifically by suggesting that others wouldn't be smart enough to get anything out of it, Clan Gyopara decided to give it to their better-mannered scholars as a form of punishment. Yet, after many months, the scholars reached a united conclusion. The crystal was worthless, a power-drained piece of rock. Then, the disappointed leaders finally gave it to Jace, assuming that even he, with his remarkable intelligence, wouldn't be able to learn anything from it. But something inside the crystal called to Jace. No, more than that, it sang to him. He couldn't explain why, but he knew the Shuriman gem still had mysteries yet to be discovered. He spent many months running every possible test on the crystal. He put it in a cogwheel centrifuge, he superheated it and deep froze it. It was the first time Jace actually had to work hard to crack the mystery. And it was the first time he realized what it must have been for others to work with him while trying to solve a problem. It felt frustrating and unfair. And he realized it probably felt much worse if you were working alongside an arrogant inventor who dismissed your every effort. But he remembered that despite his own behavior, his fellow scholars never gave up. None of them ever stopped seeking the very things that defined Piltover: progress and discovery. And if they wouldn't give up, Jace decided he wouldn't either. And maybe he would try to be nicer. Maybe. Jace approached the problem from a different angle. Rather than testing the crystal as a whole, he chipped off a piece of it and put it in a liquid alloy. As he sent electric energy through the liquid metal, Jace's eardrums nearly shattered from the booming baritone note that blasted from the shard. Heat radiated from the crystal, and with a flash it glowed so bright it nearly blinded him. It was unexpected, it was potentially dangerous, but it was progress. Jace couldn't erase the smile from his face as he worked well through the night into the dawn. The next day, Jace was surprised to find his old friend Victor on his doorstep. Alerted by the massive power spike from the crystal shard, Victor had a simple proposition. Since he got kicked from the Piltover scientific community, Victor had to work on a secret project in Zone. He finally found a way how to achieve his dreams, how to get rid of disease, hunger and hatred. If Jace joined him, the two would accomplish much more than anyone from Piltover or Zone could have dreamed of. They would save humanity from itself. Jace heard words like these from Victor before. He never liked the way they went. Victor told Jace that he only needed one thing for his glorious evolution: a powerful source like the crystal. Jace disagreed, informing Victor that what he truly needed was a moral compass. But Victor grew tired of Jace's rudeness. Without question, he grabbed the crystal and knocked Jace unconscious with it. When Jace awoke hours later, he noticed that though the crystal was gone, Victor left the chipped piece of it behind. Jace knew that whatever was Victor's plan, he would only attack him if he was close to completion. Even though he didn't know what the glorious evolution was, it probably didn't have a lot of respect for the free will of others. Without wasting a second, Jace grabbed the crystal shard and installed it into a massive transforming hammer. It was a demolition invention he abandoned years ago because he didn't have anything to power it up. He had no idea where Victor went with the crystal, but it seemed like the hammer was dragging him the right way, as if the crystal wanted to be complete again. It didn't pull him north, south, east or west, it pulled him down to the undercity of Zone. Eventually, it led him to a warehouse in the depth of the sump. Inside this building, Jace found something horrifying. Dozens of corpses. Their skulls sawed open and hollowed out. Their brains were transplanted into an army of immobile metal soldiers, hooked up to the now pulsing crystal. This was the first step in Victor's glorious evolution. Jace grew less confident as he approached. He and Victor had not always seen eye to eye, but this was something entirely different. For the first time, it occurred to Jace that he might have to kill his old friend. He called out to Victor, flinching as the army of robots stood to attention. Jace asked him to look around, to see what he was doing. Whatever this was, this evolution wasn't the progress they worked hard to achieve. To Victor's surprise, Jace even apologized for acting like a jerk. Victor sighed. He only had 2 words in response: kill him. The automaton sprinted toward Jace, breaking free of the wires connecting them to the crystal. Jace got introduced to a new emotion: panic. He gripped the hammer tightly, realizing he had never used it before. When the first golem was within reach, he swung as hard as he could, feeling the shard's energy surge through his muscles. accelerating the hammer's movement until Jace was worried it might fly out of his hands. It slammed into the robot, exploding it into a hail of metal. The other machines didn't even pause as they rushed at Jace, trying to pummel him into unconsciousness. Jace analyzed their formation, figuring out how to take all of them down with the lowest number of swings. But it was pointless. They were too fast, and before he even had the chance to swing once, they were already on him, covering him with a storm of hits. Jace saw Victor looking on, not in triumph, but in sadness. He had outsmarted Jace and ensured humanity's future, but he knew that future came at a cost. He couldn't let his old friend live. Jace vanished under a sea of swinging metal limbs. That's when Jace, for the first time in his life, decided to stop thinking and just break stuff. No longer caring for his own safety, Jace used all of his strength to break free. He sprinted to the glowing crystal and struck it with all the force his hammer could muster, crushing the mystical object. Victor cried out in horror as the crystal shattered to fragments. The shockwave blasted them backward as the army of robots collapsed. The very foundation of the warehouse shook, and Jace barely managed to escape before the entire building toppled. Victor's body was never found. When Jace returned to Piltover, he told his masters of Victor's plans. Soon, Jace found himself a topic of discussion in both Zone and Piltover alike. He became a beloved figure, at least amongst those who hadn't met him, earning himself a nickname, the Defender of Tomorrow. Jace cared little for the adoration of his fellow Piltovans, but he took the nickname to heart. He knew that Victor was still out there, plotting his revenge, and one day, maybe someday soon, an awful lot of trouble was headed to Piltover. As time went by, Jace returned to his work, but never let down his guard. He realized predicting Victor was very easy. If one weren't a fool, one might even predict the exact date and time of an attack. And Jace wasn't a fool. He stood in his workshop, surrounded by dozens of his inventions. Boots that could walk on any surface, a bag with articulated limbs which kept the user's tools within reach. But greater than all of these was Jace's hammer, which he now tossed from hand to hand as if it was any other tool. 3 sharp taps echoed from Jace's door. They were here, and he was prepared. He had ran experiments on one of Victor's robots which he left behind. He even intercepted the mechanical communications. Any second they would beat down his front door and try to rip away his hextech hammer. After that, they would try to do the same with his skull. Try being the operative word. He flicked a switch on his hammer and it transformed into a hextech blaster. He took an aim and stood his ground. The door opened, his finger ready on the trigger. And he almost blasted a 7-year-old girl's head off. She was tiny and blonde, adorable to anyone who wasn't Jace. She walked in with shuffling, tentative steps. She kept her head down as she approached Jace. He thought of 2 reasons why she would avoid eye contact. Either she was hugely impressed to be in his presence, or she was working for Victor and was about to surprise him with a chem bomb. Her blushing indicated it was the first option. "My soldier broke," she said, holding a limp metal knight, its arm bent backward. "Please leave or you'll probably die." The child stared at him. "Also, I don't fix dolls. Find someone with more time on their hands." Tears began to well up in her eyes. "I don't have any money for an artificer. My ma," she said, stifling a sob. "Mother made him for me before she passed and..." Jace furrowed his brow, and for the first time in quite a while, he blinked. "If it's so precious to you, why did you break it?" "I didn't mean to. I took him to the Progress Day feast and somebody bumped into me and I dropped him. And I knew I should have just left him at home." "Yes, you should have. That was stupid of you." The girl opened her mouth to speak, then stopped herself. Jace had seen this kind of reaction before. Everyone he met had heard the stories of his legendary hammer and unyielding heroism. They expected grandeur, they expected humility. They expected him not to be a massive jerk. Jace inevitably disappointed them. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. "Most facets of my personality, so I've been told," he replied without hesitation. The child furrowed her brow. She shoved the broken doll in his face. "Fix it, please." "You'll just break it again." "I won't." "Look," he said. "Little girl, I'm very busy and..." Something flitted across the skylight, casting a quick shadow on the two of them. Anyone else would have assumed it was nothing more than a falcon passing overhead. Jace knew better. He fell silent. A smile spread across his face as he yanked the girl toward his workbench. "The thing is," he said, "machines are very simple." He lifted a large thin sheet of bronze and began to hammer its corners with sharp taps. They're made of discrete parts. They combine and recombine in clear, predictable ways. He beat the sheet over and over until it took the form of a smooth dome. People are more complicated. They are emotional, they are unpredictable, and, in nearly every case, they are not as smart as me, he said, drilling a clean hole into the top of the dome. Now, usually, that's the problem. But sometimes their stupidity works in my favor. Is this still about my doll, or... Sometimes they are so insecure in their inferiority, so desperate to take their revenge that they make a foolish mistake. He grabbed a shining copper rod and screwed it into the center of the dome. Sometimes people fail to protect their most precious assets, he said, nodding at her tin soldier before holding aloft the newly formed metal umbrella. And sometimes that means instead of assaulting my workshop through the more obvious front door, they try to take, he looked upward, the more dramatic approach. He handed her the umbrella, which took all of her strength to keep aloft. "Hold this, don't move." She opened her mouth in response, but she was interrupted as the skylight shattered above them. Glass bounced off the umbrella as half-dozen men leapt down to the floor. Tubes of bright green chems connected the base of their necks to their limbs. Their eyes were dead, their faces emotionless. They were the drugged punks from Zone, whom Victor had pumped full of hallucinogens and hypnotics. They turned toward Jace and the girl. Before they reached them, Jace's Hextech blaster exploded and fired a lightning shot. It exploded in the middle of the group and made them slam into the walls. So much for the element of surprise, huh, Victor? A hulking brute of a machine leapt down amongst the pile of unconscious chem slaves. To Jace, it looked like something between a minotaur and a very angry building. "Watch out!" the girl yelped. Jace rolled his eyes. "I'm watching him, stop panicking. I have this situation well in..." he said, interrupted as the metal beast rammed into his chest. The beast sent Jace hurling backward. He landed on a rolling cart, his back cracking from the impact. Grunting, he pulled himself to his feet as the beast charged again. "That's the last time you touched me," he said. Jace swung his Hextech weapon as hard as he could, transforming it back into hammer mid-swing. The Minotaur lowered its head to ram Jace again, foolishly ignoring the weapon's arc. The hammer found its mark with a resounding crunch. The Minotaur's head caved all the way back into its neck and collapsed on the floor. Jace pulled back the hammer again, readying for another attack. A few minutes passed. Soon enough, he seemed satisfied the assault was over. He tried to step back toward the workbench, only to double over in pain, grasping at his stomach. The girl rushed to his side. "Still hurts where he tackled you, huh? Obviously. Then maybe you shouldn't have let him," she said. "That was stupid of you." Jace raised an eyebrow at the kid. Her eyes widened, unsure if she'd crossed the line. A smile crept across his face. "What was your name?" "Amaranthine." Jace sat at his workbench and grabbed a screwdriver. "Give me the doll, Amaranthine," he said. A massive grin broke out on her face. "So you can fix it?" Jace smirked at her. "There is nothing I can't fix." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the story of Jace. Did you enjoy it? Because if you did, you should subscribe and possibly click the bell button because Victor's story is on its way. For any possible chatting, you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and you can join our Discord. We are approaching the end of Zone and Piltover, but there are still a couple of champions to go through. And even after that, we are not done yet. So with that, thank you so much for watching and for your feedback. You know I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you come again. Warning: this video will reference Jace's story many times. If you really want to get the full experience, go and watch that story first. I know it is 20 minutes, but trust me, it will be worth it. Hello everyone and welcome! Last time we talked about the famous inventor and the hero of Piltover, Jace. But that whole story was told from his view. So let's have a look at what really happened. Victor was born in Zone, on the borders of the Entersol level. With his parents being inventors, it was very easy for them to ignite the passion for invention and building within him. He devoted every minute to his studies. He would hate to interrupt his work even to eat or sleep. Even during the usual chem spills, accidental detonations or incoming chem clouds, Victor was ready to quickly relocate if needed. Abandoning his work even for a short time was a nightmare to Victor. Because these accidents were quite common, Victor had the chance to study them, and upon closer inspection he realized that almost all of them were the result of human error, not a mechanical failure. He offered his services to the local businesses, developing inventions that would make them far safer working environments. Most turned him away, but one, the Fredersen Chemforge, agreed to try it out. Victor's inventions in automation reduced the number of accidents in the forge to 0 within a month, and soon his work spread and became common in Zone, improving production with every innovation that removed human error from a process. Eventually, at the age of 19, he was surprised to be offered a place in Zone's prestigious Academy of Techmaturgy. But Victor's work had attracted the eye of Professor Stanwyck of Piltover, who convinced him to leave Zone and travel to Piltover's Academy instead. There he could work in the most advanced laboratories and gain access to all resources he needed. Victor accepted the offer, moved up to Piltover and began upgrading his inventions so they could benefit everyone. He worked with Piltover's best and brightest, including the insufferable genius called Jace. The two matched in intellect, but where Victor was methodical, logical and thorough, Jace was flamboyant and arrogant. They worked together frequently, but they never truly became friends. They would often argue over their perceptions of intuition against logic, but a level of respect held them back as they both saw the flawed brilliance in the other. One day, Victor's work was interrupted by a major chem spill that devastated entire districts of Zone. He immediately left Piltover and returned to Zone to help those in need. Victor crafted a complicated series of cognitive loops and installed them onto an existing robot. This is how he created a custom-built golem, Blitzcrank, to help him with the cleanup. Blitzcrank was instrumental in saving countless lives and appeared to develop a level of sentience beyond anything Victor imagined. Even with the spill contained, Victor stayed in Zone and helped those afflicted by the toxins. With the golem's help, he tried to use his techmaturgical talents to save those whose lives have been blighted by the spill. Their attempt was ultimately unsuccessful in preventing more deaths, and the two separated. Though all the death in Zone worried Victor, these events taught him a lot about merging of human anatomy with technology. When Victor returned to Piltover weeks later, he found out that Professor Stanwyck presented Blitzcrank to the Academy as his own. Victor filed formal complaints with the masters of the college. But no one listened, even with all the proofs that Blitzcrank was his design. He turned to Jace to verify his claims, but he refused to speak up. further widening the rift between them. In the end, the matter was decided in Professor Stenvik's favor. Bitter but resigned, Victor returned to his studies knowing that his ultimate goal of making people's lives better and enhancing humanity was more important than one stolen project and a bruised ego. He continued his work and found more ways to eliminate human error. Over time, this became the theme in all of his future inventions. He saw human involvement in any part of a process as a grossly inefficient aberration, a view that put him at odds with many of his fellow students and professors. They saw Victor's work as an attempt to remove the source of human ingenuity and creativity. One day, Victor collaborated with Jace and worked on an improvement for a diving suit. The dock workers used these suits to keep Piltover's docks clear of underwater debris and lingering chemical waste. Victor and Jace's enhanced suit allowed the workers to go deeper, remain underwater for longer, and lift heavier weights. But many of them swore they saw phantom corpse lights in the depths, or suffered from chem-inducted hallucinations. When divers experienced these symptoms, they panicked and often killed either themselves or their fellow workers. Victor had a solution to this problem. He created a helm that allowed an operator on the surface to bypass the wearer's fear and effectively control the diver. A heated discussion between Victor and Jace on free will and mental enslavement erupted. It looked like they were going to fight over it, but in the end, they vowed never to work together again. Jace reported the incident to the college masters, and Victor was censored for violating basic human dignity. Though in his eyes, his work would have saved many lives. He was expelled from the college and he retreated back to his old laboratory in Zone, disgusted by the narrow-minded perceptions of Piltovans. Alone in the depths, Victor sank into a deep depression, enduring a traumatic period of introspection for many weeks. He wrestled with the ethical dilemma he now faced, finding that, once again, human emotion and weakness had stood in his way. He had been trying to help others, to enhance people beyond their natural capabilities, to avoid error and save lives. Revelation came when he realized that he too had succumbed to such emotions. Victor knew he could not expect others to follow where he did not go first. So in secret, he operated on himself to remove parts of flesh that relied upon or were inhabited by emotion. When the surgery was done, almost no trace of the young man who traveled to Piltover remained. Majority of his anatomy was now augmented, and his personality changed too. His hope for better society was refined into an obsession with what he called glorious evolution. Victor now saw himself as the herald of Valorant's greater future, a dream where man would sacrifice flesh in exchange for superior augments. This would free humanity from fatal errors and suffering, though Victor knew it would take time. He got back to work with fresh inspiration. He used his augments to rebuild Zonites injured in accidents, perfected breathing mechanisms, and worked tirelessly to reduce human inefficiency by decoupling physicality from emotion. His work saved hundreds of lives, yet seeking Victor's help could be dangerous. Sometimes there were unexpected consequences, but if you were desperate, Victor was the man you went to. Some in Zone, hearing fragments of his philosophy and seeing the success of his work, saw him as a messianic figure. Victor couldn't care less for them, viewing their religious cult as an aberration. It was exactly what he worked to eliminate: emotional bounds to something that couldn't be proven. After a toxic event in the sump saw hundreds of men and women in the factory wood transformed into psychotics, Victor was forced to use a powerful sedative to calm the victims and bring them back to his labs to try and undo the damage. The toxins had begun to eat away portions of their brains, but Victor was able to slow the degenerative process by opening up their skulls and employing machinery to slowly filter their bloodstream of poison. But the technology available to him wasn't good enough, and Victor knew many would die unless he found a way to greatly enhance the machinery. As he fought to save those people, he detected a surge of Hextech energy from Piltover, and he saw immediately that this could give him the power he needed. He followed the powerful energy surge to its source, Jace's lab. Victor demanded Jace to hand over the source of power, a pulsing Shuriman crystal, but his former colleague refused, leaving Victor with no option but to take it by force. He returned to Zone and hooked the crystal to his machinery, readying a steam of golem host for lab. Victor demanded Jace to hand over. It wasn't good enough, and Victor knew many would die unless he found a way to greatly enhance the machinery opening of their brains. But Victor was able to slow the degenerative process by opening up their skulls and employing machinery to slowly of his philosophy, and seeing the success of his work, saw him as a messianic figure. Victor couldn't care less for them, viewing their religious cult as an aberration. It was exactly what he worked to eliminate: emotional bounds to something that couldn't be proven. After a toxic event in the sump saw hundreds of men and women in the factory wood transformed into psychotics, Victor was forced to use a powerful sedative to calm the victims and bring them back to his labs to try and undo the damage. The toxins had begun to eat away portions of their brains, but Victor was able to slow the degenerative process by opening up their skulls and employing machinery to slowly filter their bloodstream of poison. But the technology available to him wasn't good enough, and Victor knew many would die unless he found a way to greatly enhance the machinery. As he fought to save those people, he detected a surge of Hextech energy from Piltover, and he saw immediately that this could give him the power he needed. He followed the powerful energy surge to its source, Jace's lab. Victor demanded Jace to hand over the source of power, a pulsing Shuriman crystal, but his former colleague refused, leaving Victor with no option but to take it by force. He returned to Zone and hooked the crystal to his machinery, readying a steam of golem host for each afflicted person in case their body gave out under the stress of the procedure. Empowered by the new crystal, Victor's machines went to work, and gradually the damage from the toxins began to reverse. His work would save these people, and had Victor retained more than a fragment of his humanity, he might have celebrated. As it was, all he allowed himself was a hint of a smile. Before the process could complete, Jace burst in and started smashing the laboratory with his energized hammer. Knowing an arrogant fool like Jace would not listen to reason, Victor ordered his robots to kill him. The battle was ferocious and only ended when Jace shattered the crystal Victor had taken, bringing the entire warehouse down in an avalanche of steel and stone, killing those Victor was trying to save. And for this, Jace returned to Piltover, not as a murderer or a criminal, but as a hero. Victor escaped the destruction of the laboratory and returned to his mission of improving humanity by ridding it of its destructive emotional impulses. In Victor's mind, Jace's blind attack only proved his point. Victor did send chem-augmented thugs to raid Jace's laboratory. This was, at least Victor told himself, not for revenge, but to learn if there were any more shards of the Shuriman crystal. The raid was unsuccessful, however, and Victor thought no more of Jace. Instead, he focused his efforts on finding a way to push humans into the next evolutionary stage. Sometimes his research is viewed as unethical in both Piltover and Zone, but it is necessary to bring about Victor's glorious evolution.
Dreaming of nature's power? Power that exudes lusciousness and blooms with richness. Find it in new Cream Silk Rich Organic Power Fusion. A fusion of luxurious oils and rich organic balms for naturally luscious and moisturized hair. Indulge in the power of nature. New Cream Silk Rich Organic Power Fusion.
Conditioned luscious, naturally powered.
Victor decided to make one of the houses in the Ember Flint Alley his new home. It was shrouded by fog and hardly anyone ventured here. This is why he chose this place. He preferred not to be interrupted. He was just operating on himself. His third hand fired a thin ray of light that welded metal into his left arm. The smell of burning flesh no longer bothered him, nor did the sight of his left wrist splayed open, veins and muscles fused with his augments. He did not wince. Instead, he felt a sense of achievement gazing at the seamless blend of synthetic and organic materials. The sound of children shouting outside gave Victor a pause. Keeping his left arm immobile, Victor adjusted a silver dial on his iridoscope. The device contained a series of mirrored lenses that angled light to allow him full view of the streets outside his laboratory. Several children were violently shoving a boy toward Victor's iron gates. "I doubt Naf will last a minute in there," said a girl with imitation gemstone embedded above her eyes. "I bet he comes with a brass head," said a boy with a shock of red hair. "Maybe then his brain won't be dull as grey. You better return with something we can sell, or we'll be the ones giving you a new head," said the largest one, grabbing the small boy by the neck and forcing him forward. The other children backed away, watching. The young boy trembled as he approached the towering gate, which screeched as he pushed it open. He passed the front door, encrusted with interlocking gears, and shimmered through an open window. An alarm went off as he fell to the floor. Victor sighed and pressed a switch that quieted the ringing. The skinny boy stared at the new environment. Glass jars containing organic and metal organs floating in green fluid lined the walls. A leather gurney stained with blood upon which lay mechanized drill set in the center of the chamber. Dozens of automatons stood motionless against every wall. To Victor, his laboratory was a sanctuary of his most creative and vital experiments, but he could imagine it might seem frightening to the child. The boy's eyes widened in shock when he saw Victor at his workbench, arms splayed open on the table. He ducked behind a nearby crate.
"You will not learn anything from that box, child,"
said Victor.
"But on top of it you will find a bone chisel. Hand it to me, please."
A trembling hand reached to the top of the crate and grabbed the handle of the rusted tool. The chisel slid across the floor to Victor, who picked it up.
"Thank you,"
said Victor, who wiped off the instrument and continued work on his arm. Victor heard the boy's rapid breathing.
"I'm replacing the twisting flexor tendons. The broken mechanism in my wrist,"
Victor said, reaching into his arm to adjust a bolt.
"Would you like to watch?"
The boy peeked his head around the crate. "Does it hurt?" said the boy.
"No,"
said Victor.
"When one eliminates the anticipation and fear of pain, it becomes entirely bearable."
"Oh."
"It also helps that my arm is almost completely mechanized. See for yourself."
The boy stepped away from the crate and sat across from Victor without a word, eyes fixed on his arm. Victor resumed welding a new bolt drive onto the tendons beneath his skin. When he had finished, he sealed the flaps of dermis onto his arm. He drew a beam of light across the seam, cauterizing his flesh and fusing the incision. "Why did you do that?" the boy asked. "Didn't your arm work fine as it was?"
"Do you know what humanity's greatest weakness is?"
"No," said the boy.
"Humans consistently ignore the endless infinity of possibilities in favor of maintaining the status quo."
The boy gave him a blank stare.
"People fear change,"
Victor said.
"They settle with fine when they could have exceptional."
Victor walked to his stovetop. He mixed a blend of dark powder and Dunpore cream into a saucepan, heating the liquid with his laser.
"Would you like a glass of sweet milk?"
said Victor.
"A weakness of mine, but I have always enjoyed the anise flavor."
You're not going to solve my head and replace it with a metal one?"
"Ah, is that what they think of me now?"
Victor asked. "Pretty much," said the boy. "I heard one kid had theirs replaced just because they had a cough."
"Did you get this information directly?"
said Victor. No, it was my neighbor Berma's cousin. Or uncle. Or something like that.
Ah, well, in that case.
Would replacing someone's head even get rid of a cough?
Now you're asking the right questions,
said Victor.
No, I imagine it would not be much of an upgrade. Coughing stems from the lungs, you see. And to your earlier point, I am not going to saw your head off and replacing with a metal one. Unless, of course, you want that.
No, thanks, said the boy. Victor poured the thick liquid into 2 mugs and passed one to the boy, who stared longingly at the hot drink.
It is not drugged,
said Victor and took a sip from his own mug. The boy gulped down the sweet milk. Are the others still watching outside? Said the boy through stained teeth. Victor glanced through his iridoscope. The 3 children were still waiting by the front entrance.
Indeed they are. Do you wish to give them a scare?
Victor said. The boy's eyes lit up and he nodded. Victor handed him a sonophone and said,
Scream as loud as you can into this.
The boy gave an exaggerated, blood-curdling shriek into the sonophone. It echoed along the Amberflint alley, and the other children jumped in terror, quickly scattering to hide. The boy looked at Victor and grinned.
I find that fear is more often than not limiting emotion,
said Victor.
Tell me something that scares you, for example.
The Cambarans.
The Cambarans are feared because they project an air of dominance and often the threat of violence. If no one feared them, people would stand up to them. And then, where would their power go? Away, exactly. Think of how many Cambarans exist compared to how many people live in Zone. Fear is used by powerful few to control the weak because they understand how fear works. If someone can manipulate your emotions, they can control you.
I guess that makes sense, but I'm still afraid of them, said the boy.
Of course you are. Patterns of fear are carved deep into your very flesh. Steel, however, has no such weakness.
Victor retrieved a vial containing minuscule silver beads floating in milky fluid.
That is where I may be able to assist,
he said.
I developed an augmentation that eliminates fear altogether. I could let you try it out for a short time.
How short?
The implant will dissolve in 20 minutes.
You're sure it's not permanent?
It can be, but not this one. You might find that without fear your friends out there lose their grip. Bullies feed on fear, you see, and without it, they will starve.
The boy nursed his drink, considering the offer. After a moment, he nodded to Victor, who inserted a thin needle into the vial and injected one of the silver beads into the skin behind his ear. The boy shuddered for a moment, then smiled.
Do you feel your weakness falling away?
Victor asked. Oh yes, said the boy. Victor walked him to the door and twisted a dial to unlock it before waving him out.
Remember, you can always return if you wish for a more permanent solution.
A wave of fog created a ghostly silhouette around the boy as he emerged from the laboratory. Victor returned to his workbench to watch the experiment through his iridoscope. Amberflint Alley was empty, but as soon as the boy walked out, his companions emerged. Where's our souvenir? Asked the red-haired boy. Doesn't seem like Nav has held up his end of the deal, said the girl. Guess we have to punish him, added the large boy. We did promise him a new head today after all. Don't touch me, said Nav. He raised himself to his tallest height. The bully reached for Nav's neck, but Nav turned and punched him square in the face. Blood streamed from the bully's nose. Grab him, the bully screamed. But his companions were no longer interested in grabbing him. Nav stepped toward the bullies. They stepped back. Get away from me, he said. The bullies eyed each other, then turned to Ren. Victor closed his iridoscope and returned to his work. He stretched the fingers on his newly repaired arm and tapped them on his desk in satisfaction. And that is the incredible story of Victor. I have to say, this may be my new all-time favorite champion story Riot has released. If you read through between Victor and Jace on free will and mental enslavement erupted, it looked like they were going to fight over it. But in the end, they vowed never to work together again. Jace reported the incident to the college masters, and Victor was censored for violating basic human dignity, though in his eyes his work would have saved many lives. He was expelled from the college and he retreated back to his old laboratory in Zone, disgusted by the narrow-minded perceptions of Piltovans. Alone in the depths, Victor sank into a deep depression, enduring a traumatic period of introspection for many weeks. He wrestled with the ethical dilemma he now faced, finding that once again human emotion and weakness had stood in his way. He had been trying to help others, to enhance people beyond their natural capabilities, to avoid error and save lives. Revelation came when he realized that he too had succumbed to such emotions. Victor knew he could not expect others to follow where he did not go first. So in secret, he operated on himself to remove parts of flesh that relied upon or were inhabited by emotion. When the surgery was done, almost no trace of the young man who traveled to Piltover remained. Majority of his anatomy was now augmented, and his personality changed too. His hope for better society was refined into an obsession with what he called glorious evolution. Victor now saw himself as the herald of Valorant's greater future. A dream where man would sacrifice flesh in exchange for superior augments. This would free humanity from fatal errors and suffering, though Victor knew it would take time. He got back to work with fresh inspiration. He used his augments to rebuild Zonites injured in accidents, perfected breathing mechanisms, and worked tirelessly to reduce human inefficiency by decoupling physical. Warning: this video will reference Jace's story many times. If you really want to get the full experience, go and watch that story first. I know it is 20 minutes, but trust me, it will be worth it. Hello everyone and welcome! Last time we talked about the famous inventor and the hero of Piltover, Jace, but that whole story was told from his view. So let's have a look at what really happened. Victor was born in Zone, on the borders of the Entersol level. With his parents being inventors, it was very easy for them to ignite the passion for invention and building within him. He devoted every minute to his studies. He would hate to interrupt his work even to eat or sleep. Even during the usual cam spills, accidental detonations or incoming cam clouds, Victor